now, so I'll start our hearing. We had a hearing session this morning, but most of you weren't participating, so I will introduce myself again. My name is David Little. I'm the reporter appointed by ministers to report to them on the planning appeal by Loch Long Salmon Limited for the proposed fish farm at Beinn. So this afternoon's hearing is about the nature of the proposed development. Can everyone hear me okay? Right, including at the back of the room? Okay. If anyone, there's a lot of us, we'll all have to use our microphones, so if anyone can't hear what's going on at any time, please put your hand up. We have one person who's planning to dial in remotely, but he's not. I don't think he's here on the call yet, but he can join us if he's able to. Also with me today here is Lucy Wakeham from DPEA, and Lucy's handling the IT and the webcasting for the meeting. So you should all have been emailed an agenda for today's hearing. There are a handful of copies over on that table over there under that map if anyone needs one. But I'll just go through the housekeeping things again because there's more people in the room. There's no fire alarm planned, so if the fire drill planned, so if the alarm goes off, there's two fire escapes on either side of the hall, and we would meet behind the hall. There's also a fire escape in the corridor behind me over on this side of the building. That's where the toilets are, in the corridor behind me. And if I can ask everyone to put your phones to silent and other devices as well, please. And we've two cameras and a television on precarious stands, so just take care moving around the room. Might bring a swift end to proceedings if we lose them. We've got a few things to get through, but we should be able to have a short break some point in mid-afternoon. So, I also need to say that everyone participating in the room and remotely should be aware that the meeting's been webcast and recorded. So, by participating, you're agreeing to being recorded and to the use of that information for purposes including staff training and making information available to members of the public. And the recording of the meeting will be retained for viewing on our website. So to operate the microphones here in the room, just press once. There's a button at the bottom. Press once to turn it on, and the red light should come on. Press again to turn off when you finish speaking. It's important you do that, turning on and off, not least for the webcast to give the clearest recording, also for people in the room, and particularly for Mr. Stockford as well, so that he can hear what's going on. And if you need to move the microphones, please do so holding the base rather than the stem. And if I can ask, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves very shortly, and if you could all have your nameplates facing inwards so that other parties can see. So I will start with the appellant, Mr. Findlay.
Yes. Good afternoon, sir. My name is James Findlay, King's Counsel. Sitting next to me is Stuart Hawthorne. Next to him, Mark Shotter, and finally at the end of the row, Patrick Munro. So can I just indicate that I have one administrative matter to raise once we've done the introductions arising from this morning's session.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Findlay. I'll come back to you once I've went round the table. And for the National Park Authority, Mr. McKee.
Good afternoon, sir and everyone. My name is Alistair McKee. I'm a solicitor representing the National Park Authority. On my right is Fiona Stewart, who is the National Park's Natural Heritage Planning Advisor. On her right is Alison Williamson, Planning Officer, and on Alison's right is Stuart Mearns, Director of Place at the Park. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I have Paul Nichol and several of his witnesses. Mr. Houghton, are you taking the lead, or do you want to introduce yourselves individually? Maybe if I'm going to you for questions, it's probably helpful for me if I go to one person in the first instance and you can pass it on. But maybe you could start.
So I'm Paul Houghton. I'm a planning consultant. I'm not in any way a lead. All the individuals are here representing themselves.
I'm Paul Nichol. I helped compile the statement of case.
I'm Helen Malcolm, KC. I'm not, however, here in a legal capacity, but in a personal capacity, and may act as sweeper at the end. We'll see.
Jane Hart-Beavis, just here, having done a lot of research into the paper that is our planning conditions and obligations, the nature of development paper.
I'm Karen Tant, and I'm here in a similar capacity to Jane as a research assistant, together with people to my right.
Hello, I'm James McLean, representing Half the Clyde, and I'm also Cove and Kilcreggan Community Council. My wife's a bit late, but she'll be here as Charlotte McLean.
Could I just ask Robin to introduce himself?
Certainly, yeah. Robin Stopford, I, with Paul, helped to pull together that the statement.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And welcome, Mr. Stopford. You're the only one participating remotely. If I'm failing to catch your eye, please wave your hand or use the electronic hand wave. There's a lot of us around the room, so if I miss anyone, I do apologise. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Finlay, you wanted to raise a point.
Yes, so it was just this morning, and the last matter that was raised, Mr. McKee's submissions on policy, MPF policy 4C1 and 2, and the indication that the primary case of the park was, as I understood it, under policy 4C1, and the Esto case under policy 4C2. It's really, and I'm not expecting an answer from Mr. McKee now, but we've had a short look over the luncheon adjournment, and I can't find it anywhere in the park's evidence where they set out their case on impact and integrity of the park as a whole. And it's before Mr. Flannery gives evidence tomorrow morning. So hopefully, at some stage this evening, if Mr. McKee or someone from the park could identify where their case is, then Mr. Flannery could be in a position to consider that and answer it. We understand what the park's case is on the objectives of the park and what I might call their policy 4C2 case, which Mr. McKee described as the Esto case. And that's well announced. It's the integrity or the policy 4C1 case that I'm looking for identification on. It may be we've overlooked it. But as I say, no doubt, hopefully that can be done by email sometime this evening.
Does that sound we can resolve that in time for tomorrow morning?
We can certainly provide a short justification for including that in this morning's session, sir, which hopefully will give Mr. Flannery some direction.
I don't want an additional document. I want to know where it's set out in the current documentations. If Mr. McKee wishes to apply to put a short further justification in, then that's a matter for him to do in due course.
Well, sir, if I can come back on that, you know, we've finished the policy session this morning. If that's if the appellant's case is that because the park have not specifically raised the issue of overall integrity in exactly those words, then that's really a case for him to make tomorrow, sir. As far as I can see, we will be rebutting it tomorrow.
Okay. Well, maybe we can pick that up tomorrow then, in the absence of anything in between. Can we move on just to the subject matter today?
I'll just reiterate, our request is if it is dealt with in evidence that can be identified so that Mr. Flannery can see it, so he's not taken by surprise tomorrow morning. If I'm not suggesting the park can't raise this as an issue, and no doubt it will be dealt with in closing submissions, but it's just the evidential point I wish to raise today.
Okay. Mrs. McLean, welcome. Good afternoon. Okay, so as I said, I had sent round an agenda the week before last, and I'd like to go through each of those items I've identified in the agenda. If you think there are other important issues we need to discuss, which arise from your hearing statements, which you think I might have missed, then I'm happy to hear about that too. I would say that I don't have hearing statements from Charlotte or James McLean, but if they have questions arising from the discussions, then we'll see if they can be answered. That has come through me in the first instance, but as I understand it now, you're speaking on behalf of the After Clyde paper rather than on your own behalf without a statement. Is that right?
I think that's correct, but the primary registration was because I understood this was a hearing to inform us, so we were clear on all aspects of how the system worked, which is why I wrote to you and said I would like to ask questions, but having not given a statement, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, and I'll see to what extent we can accommodate that. I think as I understand it, and thinking back to the pre-examination meeting, the appellant's offer was of that kind of session, if you like, but I think I decided to have a more structured hearing session where we all exchange evidence beforehand. Because the primary purpose is to inform me, so that I can write my report to ministers. But let's see how we go. I don't want discussion to stray away from what's been put in the hearing, or what's been foreshadowed in the hearing statements. I'm not going to answer, or not going to insist anyone answers a question that they wouldn't have expected to have been asked, or can't be prepared for. But still, I want to try and accommodate reasonable questions if I can. So if you can put them through me, then let's see how we go. But as I say, just that health warning of sticking to what's in the evidence before me. Okay. Is everyone content with those ground rules before we proceed? Okay. So, I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir. There's just a couple of small points that we were wanting to raise before we started. It may be that one was raised this morning and has been settled, and that's on, is the development that we're considering now exactly the same development as was considered by the National Park when they made their decision on the application? And we just wanted that to be clarified before we started. The second one is that we wanted to know, will you be applying the precautionary principle all the way through this session? And will that be the basis upon which you'll be making your recommendation to ministers in due course? Thank you.
Okay, so on the first one, as far as I'm aware, this is the same development that was refused planning permission. I'm not aware of any alterations that have been proposed. I know during the course of the planning application, I think there were certain changes proposed, reducing the heights of some of the infrastructure, for example. But subject, since it was determined, I'm not aware. People can shout out if I'm wrong. I'm not aware of any change to the proposal since that was determined. On the second question, well, that's something I'll need to think about, the extent to which and how the precautionary principle needs to be applied. I mean, that's to the extent that it's set out in policy. People might argue to me on that point. I don't want to. I've still got an open mind on how policy has to be applied. So it's probably an unanswerable question at this point for me. Okay, so if we go through, I propose that we would go through my agenda. If things arise, I've got a number of questions, some of which are quite open, some of which are a bit more closed. So if there is an issue that you want to raise that's germane to the point I'm making or I'm asking about, then that's probably the best time to raise it. At the end, if people think there are things that I've not covered that comes out of the evidence, then I'll try and think hopefully we have time to deal with those. But again, I'll just go back to the point that my main focus today is to know enough to write my report to ministers, and once I've done that, that's all I need to do. If you see what I mean. Let me go to the first item on the agenda, which was the primary concerns of those opposing fish farms, as described by the appellant. So I'm just going to open up the appellant's hearing statement. Or is it their statement of case, rather? So that lists so 2.10. So that lists a number of aspects or concerns about fish farm development, which, in the author's view, those are the key ones that those who are opposed to or concerned about fish farming would highlight. That seemed, on the basis of all the evidence that I've looked at, a reasonable summary. And it's just purely for me setting some context. So I wondered whether there was anyone that took issue with that as a general list.
I think we feel that it's rather focused and doesn't look at all the other issues that the public and in general people worry about fish farms. I think there's the discharge of all waste, including urine, and the effect on the benthic and surrounding marine environment. The discharge of medication and additives, not necessarily related to sea lice. Possibly also the mortalities and also the effect on wild salmon, which we'll obviously discuss probably later. I think in addition, the subject of climate change has become far more relevant in recent weeks and months, and leading to increased plankton, algal bloom, microjellies, which are a huge issue at the moment. So I feel that the 2.1 is rather focused and should be opened up to the wider issues.
Okay. I mean, that's all I'm doing. This is setting the scene. I'm not proposing to dive in detail to each of these things. I'm just trying to understand that whether that characterisation was a fair one or in your view too narrow. Are there any other points to be made on that? It's just about scope. So.
Yep. We don't agree because we feel that the points are quite generic, and it's a claim for all fish farms as opposed to this particular application. So we consider that the hearing should concentrate on this particular proposal, and the additional ones that we consider are of relevance, which are not mentioned, is unproven nature of the technology being proposed and the scale of what's being proposed in this application. Also, integration between the escaped farmed salmon on the fragile salmon population in the Endrick Water European site and in the other salmon rivers in this area. Now, we also feel that the ability of the negative effects of the proposal to be satisfactorily mitigated and managed through the proposed FEMP and the technical standards are also of key importance. And the last point I'll bring in here is the unacceptable seascape, landscape and visual effect of the development.
Okay. Yeah, no, certainly I can reassure you it's the effects of this development that I'm interested in. I just took that extract from the hearing statement to be making a general scene setting point rather than saying these are the only things, these are the things that are relevant to this application. Okay, is there anything else on that point?
So may I add one matter, which is Mr. Nichol mentioned mortality rates, but certainly my interest is the disposal of dead fish. Everybody accepts there will be a number of dead fish. The precise number, of course, may vary. But how and when will they be disposed of?
Okay, and from the agenda, we should be coming back to that point. Can I move on, or is there anything else to add? As I say, it was quite a general point. I was just trying to see if there was consensus on it. Okay, so the second item on my agenda is the extent to which the proposal is commercially proven or still at trial, and so the appellant's evidence refers to commercial use since 2014, I think, in the hearing statement, and over 150 production cycles. But Clyde, for example, says that convincing evidence of successful full-scale commercial operation is lacking. I noticed, I think, the letter from Hatch, which is 6.12, talks about only full commercial use since 2018, and the letter from Pharmac Analytics has the same date. However, Nicholas Wright's inquiry statement, not everyone will have read that, necessarily suggests, well, he says a decade, so that suggests to me 2013. So I'm just trying to understand the factual position that I've got various dates given as to when commercial production started. So can the appellant help me out with that in the first instance?
So to that specific point, I think commercial licenses were being issued in 2018, but I would argue and believe that people have been using these systems to produce fish for the commercial operations since earlier than that, in line with what we suggested.
So you're saying that the first commercial license is expressly for 2018, but in effect, de facto position is it had been operating on a commercial basis before that, or on the same scale? Is that the kind of thing you're saying?
Not necessarily on the same scale, but the way it worked is prior to 2018, the Norwegian government wanted to stimulate innovation because of concerns around mortalities, sea lice, and all the benefits that we'll get into shortly, or the concerns that we'll get into shortly. And so they issued these, they called them development or green licenses, and the initial semi-closed containment systems at sea were issued under that basis of these green or development licenses. And then some converted into full commercial licenses, and some new full commercial licenses started being issued from 2018 onwards.
And those green or development licenses, when is it 2013, 2014? Is that when we're talking about the first ones?
I would need to check to determine that exact date, but around that time.
Sir, could I perhaps respond to that, if I may be so bold to? Yeah, just on the Hatch letter, I think it's interesting, sir. I think it's APP 6.12, and you've referenced that we've got this sort of cut-off date of 2018. That's when these matters are being issued commercial licenses. But if one looks at the bullet point below the one you've just referred us to, it says in Norway, SCCS have been granted full commercial licenses for marine production by the Directorate of Fisheries since 2018. The next sentence says, before, SCCS projects operated solely under research and development licenses. In my submission, sir, that couldn't possibly be a commercial full license, because in its terms it is a research and development license. The other thing I would just like to draw to your attention, sir, is that in the Hatch letter, which is I think repeated in the Analytica letter, I think it says that in the last 8 years, more than 30 SCCSs have been in operation in 150 cycles. And I think it'd be helpful for everyone to know how many fish farms are we dealing with here and where are they? There's 30. There could be 5 semi-closed containers per fish farm. That could only be, 5 or 6 fish farms. Not a great deal in numerical terms, but how many fish farms are we talking about, and where are they? Because the parks have had great difficulty in trying to track and analyse these fish farms in different geographical areas in Norway and Canada. So I think it'd be helpful if the appellants could clarify that.
I mean, just to clarify, it says research or development licenses, not research and development licenses, which I think is material in terms of the intent of what that means. So in Norway, they had these green or development licenses, as they were called. They were to stimulate innovation by commercial farmers. So in terms of commercial use, it was salmon farmers who were producing salmon for human consumption that were using these systems. And that would be my position. They were being used in the commercial phase, being stimulated by the Norwegian government through these development licenses. You've got one there. So in terms of and then if you just give me a second here. So in terms of where are sites and those types of things, I'm just trying to find my notes where sorry, just forgive me. There's a lot of information here that we're trying to navigate our way through. Can you help me find where that is, Mark? Okay. Good. So, I personally visited a number of farms over the years in Norway looking at these systems. And there are multiple companies operating these systems. Aquafarm systems are being operated by Maui, and they're being used at another site now by a company called Salmar. And they've been using those since 2015, 2016. Feast systems were being used not just in Norway, but around the world. So multiple sites in Norway, also in the Faroe Isles and in Canada. We have provided a list of specific sites where their equipment's been, and companies who have bought and deployed their equipment at various times. Eco-Merden systems are being used at multiple sites in Norway. I don't have the specific geographic locations of those sites, and they're rolling out new systems now that are 30,000 cubic metres, with Maui, for example, having 3 of those systems now installed. Sinkeberg Hansen, another company using feast technology, they've got 6 units at one site. So in terms of scale, that's 90,000 cubic metres of production volume. And Hidden Fjord in the Faroes, they've got 4 of these systems at one site. So that's 60,000 cubic metres of production volume at one location. A different company called Aqua Futures, they're operating 30 individual units with a total volume of 180,000 cubic metres. So, there's multiple locations. Some are 1 or 2 units in a location. Some are at more significant scale in terms of the operations of these systems.
I don't know whether Mr Hawthorne's ever been asked to provide a list of geographical locations by the park before. Don't believe he has, but if that's something that would assist you, then geographical location, we can see what we can do in that regard.
Well, I'll have a think about whether I think I need that. I've got a couple of people I think who wanted to come in. Was that Arnold Beavis?
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to say that as far as we are aware, the Institute of Research and Development for Contained and Semi-Contained Cages in Norway, CTR Aqua, started their research in 2014. That's when they initially got their funding for a fixed amount of time. That research ended in last year, and they produced their final report recently in August this year, where most notably they describe semi-closed containment facilities as still having a way to go and being at pilot stage. Thank you.
So if I
was going to ask, didn't it say many of them or most of them or something like that at pilot stage? I don't think it did. Said they were all at pilot stage, is how my reading of that report.
I think they were describing, in general, semi-closed containment technology.
Did you want to come back on that particular point before I go across?
I was going to make the same point, that they actually say most, and we're not proposing to use most, we're going to use specific sort of concept that would fit within our design envelope.
So perhaps I'd add to that. In the same paragraph to which Ms Hartland Beavis is referring, they say that they concluded that Testum systems work as intended regarding health, welfare and performance. They have no lice and the fish do not escape.
So just to add the parts tuppence worth, it also states in that report, and I quote, "There are still developmental needs to complete the system to become off-the-shelf ready, especially for the semi-closed systems." I think really the park are not opposed to technological innovation, sir. What confronts the park is the need, due to the sensitivity of the site here, to have independently verified information, and that has been lacking. Mr Hawthorne has offered to provide a list of geographical locations, but this information could have been provided during the course of the application. But we've been forced to go through a hunt and a paper chase, and it's very difficult to actually establish, what is the commercially proven nature or otherwise of this development.
So Mr McKee should be very careful. This was never asked for. If he's going to make these contentious points now, then we'll note them and deal with them in due course, but it's not going to assist you. If they wished for a list of such locations during their research, they could have done so. They didn't. And we note his approach to whether he'll accept Mr Hawthorne's evidence or not.
So if I can just come back on... so if I can just finish on that. The board report, which went to committee in... I think it was November of 2022, makes it explicitly clear that the park's view is that this is unproven technology. The appellant has had since then, formulating their grounds of appeal, to provide that further information and evidence, and they have simply failed to do so, sir, in a manner that the park authority find verifiable and acceptable.
So if I may, sir, commercial use, right now, literally, millions of fish are being farmed in these systems. Cermaq in Canada, right now, just last weekend, putting in fish into a semi-closed containment system to be used in their production systems. These systems have been in development for more than 30 years. There's a useful summary of that in the document called Paul Nichols 005 in section 2.1, pages 16 and 17. And since 2013, more than 30 systems have been installed. In fact, more than 40 systems have been installed. The 30 number is referred to in that Hatch letter, which is at 6.12 in the second point. Hatch have gone on to say that for the last 5 years, farmers have been adopting new farming strategies using these systems. That's at point 1 of that same document, app 6.012. And since 2018, as has already been alluded to, commercial permits have been issued. We've also supplied to the park a letter from Farmac Analytic. This is app 1.18 at paragraph 3. Regarding semi-closed containment systems, while this technology would be new to Scotland and Norway, semi-closed containment systems have been granted full commercial licences for marine production since 2018 by the Fish Directorate. So when you talk about is the systems being now used commercially, at the very least since 2018, the park and Mr. Nicholl and others are agreeing that the technology has been used commercially. So, I would be saying today now, systems are being used commercially at scale. Now, there's various different designs of these bits of equipment, and I've got quite a lot to talk through here, so please, if you think I'm overgoing, then please just cut me off, and I'll no doubt we'll get a chance to bring them up.
Yeah, it's not that. It's just that I'm aware that a few people wanted to come in, and so I want to give them a chance to do that before we move on. Ms. Tant, I think you were going to come in earlier on. And
Thank you, sir. In your hearing statement, under points 3.16 and 4.14, LLS actually cite 150 production cycles producing 10 million fish over 15 locations in 3 countries. This does sound very impressive, but simple maths reveals that 10 million fish divided by 150 cycles results in an average of 66,667 fish per cycle. If we assume that these fish are not all grown to full size, but are rather at the stage of around 1 kilogram, which most of these systems have produced in their commercial operations, we get an average of 66,667 kilograms per cycle. This is 66.67 tons per cycle. The appellants are proposing here 3,452, I think, is the planning SEPA license. Sorry, the ratios here. The commercially proven does not link up to what the applicants, the appellants here, are wanting to install.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to allow some other points to be raised on this issue, and then I'll come back and let you respond. Okay, just so as we can get them all. It's probably easier doing it that way. Mr. McLean.
I think one of the points that Arthur Clyde brought up is that I don't think there is a system in this configuration anywhere else in the world. So the waste retrieval and processing on which the planning application relies has not been proven elsewhere, and I think that's one of the concerns. That we can talk about lots of installations around the world, but nothing has been tried in this configuration with the waste transport and retrieval system. And I'm just wondering whether we can have a bit more information on that and whether there is.
Okay, and there's an agenda item about that later, but if Mr. Shorten wants to respond at this point, then that's fine. We'd rather deal with that in that point. That's fine. Mr. Nicholl, did you something related to this?
I think it's a similar
item?
point. But I do think we have got an issue here that we've got no experts to rely upon. So we are very much relying upon written evidence and practical exposure.
We did want to add, sir, that if the appellants can provide a list of locations, we would be very happy to have a look at it, and we would ask that if that happened, that we be given a suitable amount of time to respond to it.
So I don't know if I can add a follow-up to that. I may be quite wrong, but I understood Mr. Hawthorne has been asked in terms for a specific location where this system works at this commercial level, and there hasn't been any answer. There have been offers to pay, we would pay ourselves to go and visit those, or to instruct an expert to go and visit them, and there hasn't been an answer. So it would be enormously useful to have the specific location, when they were granted the licence, who by, and how it's functioning now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I said Mr. Shorten, I meant Mr. Hawthorne. Apologies. Okay, in light of those points, then you said you had a lot to say. I'm conscious of our time, but I'd anticipated spending more time on this agenda than maybe this item than some of the others. So I think that's fine. But over to you.
I mean, I would say it was pleasing to hear Karen saying commercially used, because I agree these are commercially used. And indeed, up to systems with 30,000 metres cube for one enclosure, which is the sort of maximum size we've allowed for in our planning envelope. I've been farming fish for more than 30 years, and I feel that I've got a lot of knowledge about what's commercially done and what's research and development. And when you're producing millions of fish through these systems, in my opinion, they're being used commercially. These fish are being put in, be grown for either part or all of their life, and taken through to as post-smolt or to harvest size successfully in semi-closed systems that raise fish. Now, it's correct that there's no development exactly the same as what we're planning on doing. But that's normal in aquaculture developments. Every fish farm is different because it depends on the site, the topography, the arrangement. There's no two identical systems anywhere. And we've got this urgency around concerns around the environment that were being discussed in the sort of policy part this morning. And we've got an opportunity here to do something that's not just another fish farm. This is a step change for something positive to make a difference to mortalities, to use of treatment chemicals, to impacts on wild fish, to reducing impacts and interactions with marine mammals and seals in particular, rather than discharging waste. And I'll be going through these things, I'm sure, quite a lot this afternoon. But these systems are being used commercially in Norway right now. Millions of fish are in them, being grown through to harvest size, as well as for post-smolt to make a difference elsewhere. Yeah, and Mr. Finley's just pointing out to me that Maui have just recently have installed 3 of these 30,000 metre cubed eco-merdin systems in Norway, and they're using them now. And then just one more thing for scale. I think I alluded to it a bit earlier, but Aqua Future, 180,000 cubic metres of volume. Our development, we're proposing 120,000 cubic metres of farming volume. Sinkeberg Hansen, 90,000 cubic metres. Hidden Fjord, 60,000 cubic metres. These are not insubstantial. These are I would say that's a similar scale of development to what we're doing, and that's why I'm confident that we'll be able to deploy successfully and to make a difference. Okay,
I'll come back to. I want to assure people I've read all the evidence. I've not read every word of every document, but I've read, in preparing for this hearing, I read that Control Aqua report, all the documents people are referring to, I've referred to. So we'll not get anywhere if we just go back over what people have put in the written submissions. But if there's other points arising from that, Mr. Nicholl, and then I'll come over.
It's just if Mr. Hawthorne is going to provide a list of sites that he states, what would be helpful is that he just provides the sites that are doing waste extraction to 85%. So we are comparing like with like.
So if I can just come in a bit. Sorry.
Thank you. On the issue of like for like, Stinkerberg Hansen, as I understand it, is primarily a processing facility. So they do have relatively large cubic metre capacity. Recently they installed 5, I believe, of the 15,000 cubic metre capacity. However, their green permit was only for 827 tonnes. So their stocking density is much, much lower. And I think you'll find that in many of the Norwegian farms that the stocking density is actually relatively low. So Hidden Fjord is also very focused on systems that are out further at sea where the fish have a lot more ocean, as it were, to swim in. So I think we really need to look, when these comparisons are being made, at exactly what the comparisons are. And when the figures are being bandied about, that the figures are real figures. Thank you, sir.
Okay. No, thank you. Sorry, the first, did you say Hansen?
Stinkerberg Hansen. So, as I understand it, they are primarily a processing facility, and they had a green permit for 827 tonnes for the 75,000 cubic metres that Mr. Hawthorne mentioned, installed recently.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McKee, you
were going to come in. It was a very short point, but when Mr. Hawthorne was providing information which to some extent seems to be at his fingertips, which leads me to believe it would be readily available to put it before this hearing before now. But he did say specifically there are differences with his proposal. And as you've said at the inception of this hearing, this is a hearing into this specific proposal. So I think it'd be helpful to hear what are the differences. And I think that is what's causing a major challenge for the National Park in its assessment. What is different about this proposal from the other proposals in Norway, Faroe Islands? You know, has it got the same? Does it work the same? Is it operationally the same? Does it have the same oxygen delivery and waste extraction? We're just not sure.
Does that just take us back to waste, or is it a different? Are there other significant differences?
Our development is, I mean, I think it's kind of almost bizarre to be saying that we've not explained what we're proposing. Of course, we've been explaining that for years to the National Park what we're proposing. In fact, as early as 2019, we were showing them pictures of what things would look like. So I find it very strange that they're claiming to not understand what we're putting forward, because we've been putting it forward consistently since 2019. In terms of waste capture, I think we will cover that this afternoon or later on today, so I don't think I would need to get into that just now. Just responding to the comments from Karen about Stinkerberg Hansen. I mean, that company is producing fish commercially. The 875 tonnes, I haven't seen that number, so I don't know where that comes from. But if it was as part of their green licence, they're not farming under a green licence now, they're farming under a commercial licence now. And I do not recognise the volumes of fish and tonnages that she's talking about as accurate. You know, there's R&D papers that we've referred to in the evidence where they've talked about farming fish in these systems safely with good fish welfare outcomes up to 75 kilograms a cubic metre. We're only planning on farming fish up to 35 kilograms a cubic metre at this development. It's very conservatively approached. the Hatch letter's got a reference to safe stocking rates. The Pharmac analytic letter, which is, let me find a document reference for you for that. Sorry, bear with me. 117. Just let me get the right one. Where's the 117 mark? APP. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, APP 1.17. They talk about up to, I don't have it written down in my notes here, but I think it's up to 94 kilograms a cubic metre that they're aware of. So, you know, we're not talking about pushing an envelope here. We're pragmatic, cautious people who want to make sure that we deliver a successful outcome, because we passionately believe that we're in a climate crisis and a nature crisis, and business as usual isn't working. And this is not business as usual. This is about making a positive difference.
Can I ask just a question? It was Mr. McKee's point about, well, you'd said all systems are different, or ours is different from others. That's site specific. And so clearly every site must be different, and I don't need to know the minute or small details between sites, but if I was asking you to point to any significant differences between this site and others in terms of what's new technology or what's a new configuration, the main thing that comes out from the evidence, certainly from the evidence of objectors, is about the waste disposal and treatment. We'll come on to that. But is that, as you see it, is that the main difference, if you like, from what's been done before? Or and I'm also aware there's evidence about different water depths between here and Norway, and so we'll come on to that in the agenda. But yeah, what do you think of the main differences?
Certainly with waste capture, our ambition is for more, but again, Mark's going to be covering that later on in more detail, so I don't think there's any need for me to discuss that just now. But in terms of, you know, the difference between us and conventional open nets, you know, huge differences obviously. But in terms of us and you know, I would say we're comparable to Aqua Futures technology, Aquafarm technology, FISC, Certis technology, and the Ecomerdon technologies. Fundamentally, it's a floating collar with a marine barrier and a net, as I say, so double containment, and bringing deep water in to give the fish a good environment with no sea lice. Adding control, so you can add oxygen so you don't get changes in oxygen levels, preventing sea lice completely, eliminating the risk of, sorry, let me just clarify, maybe not quite completely for sea lice, but again, that's a specific question that we'll cover shortly. Significantly reducing the amount of plankton and jellyfish that enter the farm compared to open nets. It's, you know, this is not a business as usual. This is a step change, and it's, you know, it's seen as nationally important.
Yeah, yeah. So I should have clarified. The question that was interested in was different from other semi-closed containment systems. Not different. How is it different from other open net fish farms? Okay. I feel like, well, okay.
Can I just one question? Yeah. I'm just a little bit baffled about the nature of this technology, because Mr. Hawthorne's just explained, you know, the range of manufacturers, and he sort of referenced the FISC Certis system. I thought the FISC Certis system was the one for which planning permission is being sought here, because that is the one that's depicted in the planning drawing. So the fact that he didn't say that slightly confused me, and it's probably raising further ambiguities in the park as to what is actually before you in true reality, sir.
Mr. Mackay may be confused, but if he'd read the EIA, he'd read reference. There's no specific system being applied for. It's a system within an envelope of characteristics, very akin to a wind farm. Nobody chooses their model of wind turbine. when it's not going to be put in place for another 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the case may be. So our application has not changed for what we have sought, and we have illustrated it with various systems, primarily the FIS system, which again is not unusual in applications. But we are not tying ourselves, and have never tied ourselves, to a specific system. And indeed the Parks report is made on that basis.
So that's an interesting point, because I'm pretty sure in the evidence that is contained within the appellant's hearing statements on this point, they do specifically reference the FISC Certus system as being the approved version of what they're proposing, which is why obviously we tie that up with the image they have from the FISC website that is then one of the planning drawings, sir. So that's I think that's news to us, what we've just heard.
Yeah, I must say, I thought I'd read somewhere in your evidence that you had selected FISC and that they were to be, that FISC, that they would be the supplier. So I'll come back a second. So that's your intended supplier at the moment, but there's, in your view, the permission wouldn't be limited to that this would be resolved through a planning condition, presumably, for the detailed
absolutely
purifying the planning.
And it's why that, for instance, it would be commercially bizarre to link yourself to a specific system and get planning permission for a specific system that, for instance, may no longer be in production when you come to put it in place. But the conditions proposed would ensure that the other licensing regimes in place would ensure that the system was an appropriate one and complied with the relevant requirements. And it would be limited by conditions, say the size, the scale, again akin to a wind turbine.
So if I may just clarify that, the sort of planning envelope we've talked about is a diameter of 47.8 metres from memory. I need to double check these exact numbers. 2 metres above, 1.5 metres above the water for the walkways, 2 metre wide walkways, those types of criteria. And the FISC is a good example, and I would say that that may well be what we end up deploying, but that may be might be slightly different too, depending on what's available at the time and what the best solution is available at the time.
Sir, can I just say the Park Authority doesn't necessarily accept the analogy between fish farming proposals and wind farm proposals, but this proceeds as a detailed application. So the full details of the design should be expressed within the planning application drawings and documents, and certainly the one that's been lodged is the Certus one. That's the one I thought we were dealing with, not a concept. This isn't a concept, sir. This is a detailed application.
Okay, I'm conscious most of the conversation of the last 10 minutes has been up here. Ms. Hartnell-Beavis, on you.
Thank you, sir. It's a question I'd like to ask the appellants, which is, has the PPA-002-2020 30,000, their largest design, ever been used in only 40 metres depth water? I know they've used the 30,000 elsewhere, but one assumes that the water depths have been greater than that. On pages 11 and 12 of our statement, you'll note that Ashley Curry, FISC Scotland manager, states that the FISC cages are designed to be sited at locations with depths of 60 to 70 metres, and that certain specifications have been modified. Is the section that you submitted with your planning application showing the modified design? Because we're all very familiar with the section that you show with your applications and on your presentations. Have the intake depths been altered to cope with the reduced depths here? And has this design with the FISC Certus 30,000 been trialled anywhere at these depths and what are the results? And we'd like to ask the reporter, with respect to that, if any design modifications have been made that are substantial like that to cope with the limited depths here, will a revised planning application be necessary? Thank you.
Okay, was there any other questions here or points? Mr. Nick?
It's just a very small point, but Mr. Hawthorne mentioned in his statement of case that the density of fish is going to be 35 kilograms. In the farm management plan, they state that it's going to be up to 50 kilograms and overall 40. And I just wondered what was the figure.
Okay, so there's I'm going to try and wrap up this section of the agenda, if that's okay, because I feel we might return to some of these points anyway. The two questions there were about water depth, but about the difference between what's in the farm management plan and what CPF consented, I guess.
Sorry, it's just what Mr. Hawthorne had said, right, that he was doing it at 35.
As for a new planning application, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look. I have to advise ministers on what they're consenting, and I will have to review. I'll have to look back again into what I've got to see what's been submitted, but whether, yeah, it's an open question. I'm not sure. Without reviewing the evidence, the extent to which I would adopt Mr. Finley's proposition of an envelope and that wind farm approach, or whether Mr. McKee's right that it's implicit that it's more tied down to a particular system. I just, without looking back into the evidence, I couldn't say. If we do that, and then I'm going to cross. Yeah.
So just to make, we agree with Mr. McKee's proposition.
Yeah, I'd just like to highlight, you asked about the difference in systems with the proven systems, and I think one of the big differences here are the volumes. So although MOE may have recently had a 30,000 cubic metre, we'll see later when we're talking about problems with the systems that these large volumes are not proven, regardless of the waste. We're talking about large volumes here.
Okay, Mr. Hawthorne. Before I move on, there was 2 or 3 points there. Do you want to respond?
Can you just clarify which questions you want?
So, well, yeah. So the things that I'd noted were the question about whether the system is modified or has been whether the drawings show the system as modified for this water depth. I think I've got that right. And there was Mr. Nichols' question about, I suppose, asking for clarity just on what the proposed stocking density was. It's more complicated than that. I think that those were the 2 things, and then Ms. Tance there has mentioned the issue about whether the difference here, as previously, is that this would be greater volume than previously. I think that's the question you. Sorry.
Not as previously, but to other systems. So a lot of the examples that Mr. Hawthorne gave were for 15,000 cubic metre systems that have been installed, and these are 30,000 cubic metres. And as I understand it, I'm not an engineer, but as I understand it, that does make a big difference with the water volumes that are being moved, etc., etc., etc. And we'll see when we talk about problems with systems. I think that's the next point perhaps on the agenda, or the one after. No, it's the next point on the agenda, that these large volume systems have experienced some calamities.
So the National Parks Natural Heritage Planning Advisor just mentioned to me she has a few comments to make, if I can ask for that to be
okay, well, let's hear those then, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Hawthorne.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. I think it's just important that the issue here is whether the proposal is commercially proven or it's still at the trial stage, because that's absolutely crucial for us. We consider the possible adverse effect on the integrity of the Enric Water SAC And it's not that the National Park are against fish farming or, technological innovation. It's just that we absolutely have to have tight evidence that the systems will work. And, that's what's absolutely crucial, and we've not been able to find any evidence on that. So, the National Park, we have referred to the exact technology as it was referring to the semi-closed system, because we need to know that that system is going to work, and we've not been able to find that to date. The appellants made the point that the technology is proven, but again, Norway and Canada, we cannot find exact examples of that. And we have been looking for that. We've read many reports which have told us that it's still at the pilot stage. You've made reference to the fact that you have read those. So that's really to have some weight in order for us to form, a tight opinion on, both the ecology and, for that matter, the landscape issues. We need to know just exactly what the system is, and we need to know that it is proven.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawthorne, I'm going to ask final comments on this, and then I want to move on, just because we've got a lot to get through.
So I'll come to the parks comments at the end, but in terms of systems and are they designed, they'll be designed for the site and approved for the site depending on the system we use. Certainly talking with FISC, depth of inlets, 25 metres, depth of system 40 metres, you can run the system at this particular site. Aquafuture, quite much shallower sites are possible with Aquafuture, for example. So, site design and setup is different depending on the topography of the site, but we wouldn't be deploying, and people wouldn't be supplying us equipment that doesn't fit that site and doesn't meet the technical standards and won't meet the biology of the site. And that's based on a decade of running these systems elsewhere. Stocking densities, there have been some clarifications on that over the process. We clarified the 35 kilograms a cubic metre to Marine Scotland. I can't remember exactly what date that was, but as we went through the planning process as the maximum we'd be planning to use at that site. That said, over time, that may well be modified as we operate the systems with more confidence.
Can I just ask on that point, and that's regulated by Marine Scotland through the car licence, is that right, in terms of the biomass?
No, the biomass is regulated by SEPA. Marine Scotland's so that's the maximum biomass is regulated by SEPA. Marine Scotland look after things from a fish health and welfare point of view. I think the comments from Ms. Tant, I think we'll be talking about that shortly. She's alluded to that herself, so I think we'll just wait till we get to that point. And then around commercially proven, I feel that I've provided very strong evidence. Even some of the folks sitting over there are saying they acknowledge that these systems are commercially used and proven. I don't know what else we can say. I don't understand why the park can't find what other people can find and that we've supplied that demonstrates that these systems are being used commercially and work. Because they are. There's millions of fish in them today.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to item 3 then, which is alleged problems with semi-closed containment systems deployed today. So I don't have a particular question to ask on this. I've seen the documents. I think from reading the issue, there was a trial in Canada that had to be ended early because of a failed pump, I think it was, but then I see that the trial was picked up again after that. There was the issue with the case, the Certus cages in Norway that seemed to have well, I think the word used was crashed, but it seemed like they were still being assembled or still being built, and they were damaged. But anyway, both Paul Nicol and the National Park Authority, to the extent, have picked up on these. I see that Nicholas Wright's inquiry evidence responds to some of these incidents, because that will be relevant to the inquiry session anyway. So I just wanted to ask you, give the appellant the chance to respond to the hearing statements of objectors if you wanted to. I don't have any particular questions myself.
Yeah, so well, thank you for that opportunity. Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, there's basically two issues that have been raised, and you've correctly summarised those there: the Canadian issue and the deployment issue of the FEIS Certus 30,000 systems. Again, that SARF report, Paul Nicol 005, has also got a list of cage systems that were developed in their sort of pilot and development stages. And there's a couple of issues there raised of, as people are developing things and that sort of prototype phase of issues being raised. There's a particular reference to an agri-marine facility, which I'd just like to point out was a different design and didn't have double containment. Yep, FEIS have been running systems of all sorts of sizes over the last decade. Aquafarm have been deploying their Neptune semi-closed containment system. And all of these different systems, and Ecomer are now deploying systems of 30,000 cubic metres successfully into Norway. And so all of these systems are being used now and have been used over this period of development. So, this huge number of operations using these systems, successfully eliminating blah, 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 all the different key things that are very important to allowing agriculture to flourish in Scotland. And we've got two examples of things not quite working right. One was the Canadian issue where a pump failed. I mean, I would point out it was during COVID. And so it was challenging. The supply chain was challenging. People travelling was challenging, very challenging, with borders shut all over the world. And that document, PPA-002-2020, refers to that failure. But subsequently, CERMAT Canada have gone on to say, after further use, the system has surpassed expectations. We have seen remarkable growth. And they go on to say, we're in the process of moving the system to a new site, but are pleased to share that this is not a phase 3 trial, but rather the incorporation of the technology into the production planning. And that's in document APP 6.52.
If I may, Stuart, just related to that issue, there was no sea loss, there was no additional environmental impact, there were no escapes. The fish were simply harvested earlier than planned.
Thank you, Mark. And then with respect to the Osland Havbrook cage deployment, so during the commissioning installation process, a design issue was identified, and the system problems in a storm event. No fish were put in those systems. It was identified through that commissioning process. And we've talked with FEIS about this. Of course we have. And what they've indicated to us is that they've commissioned a company called DNV to reassess that, and actually to reassess all their other models that are currently being used. And DNV is the sort of preeminent marine verification / certification company operating, and they operate worldwide in this field. And right now, customers are continuing to use these systems. And I would say as well that that there's been the customers are using the systems, and the Norwegian government, the Faroese government, and the Canadian government regulators, none of them have said we should be stopping to use these systems. And so I think that should be given considerable weight when considering what we're thinking about for the Beinn location, because all of these different models fit within that design envelope. And then just finally, of course, with regard to sort of structural integrity of systems, we would be deploying to the Scottish technical standards the systems that we use, or indeed the Norwegian standards. If they happen to supersede or be more stringent, we would deploy to those standards as well.
Okay, thank you. I've read what's in your evidence, Mr Nicholl, and the others, but I'm just obviously going to give you a chance to respond, and then I'll hopefully be able to move on to the next agenda. But over to you.
Thank you. I think that there's two things that I would say to Mr Hawthorne. Firstly, there seems to be a lot of reliance upon what Fitz say, which is, I wouldn't believe what a car salesman tells me when he's trying to sell me the car. And I think the other issue is that when you mention these other successful operations, that you only mention ones that have waste extraction, because we're talking like for like. It can't be other things. And I think with these systems, I don't doubt there are benefits to it all. We're not here to knock it in every way, but there are issues with it. The Control Aqua final report and the Stavanger University master's thesis say there is, to date, not sufficient data. And also, it doesn't necessarily, as the Control Aqua report says, the micro and macro parasites. The inlet water is not treated, so it allows the ingress of pathogens. The discharge water may include viruses.
We seem to be getting on beyond this agenda item here.
Oh, sorry. I was meaning the problems with this.
But what I meant. So that's probably my agenda item not being drawn to precisely enough. I think what I meant there were the two incidents that had occurred, not these wider issues about which we've got a fish health stroke welfare is number 7 on the agenda, for example. So perhaps all I was interested in at this point were those two, where it had gone wrong for two particular systems. So I don't know if there's a point about that anyone wants to raise.
I'll defer to one of my colleagues on that.
So can I just say about the Cermaq Canada one? I don't know whether it was within COVID, because all we know is it's 2021, which was late on in the COVID cycle. But what we're all skating around, as my understanding is, the problem was the fish were drowning in urine. That was the effect of the pump breaking. And that might lead us into your next agenda item, which is liquid waste, which is nowhere dealt with by the appellants in their hearing statement. And I know that's your next agenda item, so I won't say anything more now.
Could I just add one point that I think is very specific to this area? Anybody who lives in this area knows single track roads, a fatal accident, the road's closed for 8 hours quite regularly. This could quite easily happen here. So, the similarity with COVID and a road accident could be the same.
Okay, thanks. Do you want to say anything more on this before we... Oh, I'm sorry.
I think I picked up in the farm management report that there might be a problem if oxygen, if something were to go wrong with the oxygen supplies. So this picks up from the point that Paul Nicholl just made. And I think in the farm management report, there is an issue highlighted with oxygen. And I heard in the previous session that there is the issue with this single track road, a very narrow road. We know what situations can be like here in the Highlands. So, yeah, COVID situations and fish dying because of incidents like this could relate to the incident that there was in Canada. And we've got these high stocking densities in very, very large volumes if the proposal were to go ahead, with then the relevant dealing with the problem. I think that's dealt with in the farm management regarding, is it called routine mortalities and, I don't know, mass mortalities?
So if I may, I mean, I'm not relying on a car salesman. I've visited aquafarm sites, feast sites, aquafuture sites. My colleague has visited Ecomerden sites and at 2 different locations. We do talk, of course, to the person supplying the equipment, but we also have been doing our own due diligence. We've gone to independent research organisations, Control Aqua. We've gone to Pharma Analytic and said, can you do a review for us, please, into the safety of these systems and how they're being used? And everyone's coming back and saying these systems work. Control Aqua, if you can just get me the quote again, Mr. Finlay, that would be helpful. So we're not doing things here that are not well established. It says, we have concluded that the tested systems work as intended regarding health, welfare and performance. They have no lice and the fish do not escape. So that's that piece. In terms of the road, yeah, of course, there's a road access to the site, and it's great that people are concerned about the integrity of that road. We are too. We've designed the site to have at least 8 days of storage of oxygen, ability to store 8 days of salmon poo, 8 days of power generation in the case of something happening with the power line. And then in addition to that, we can bring stuff in by sea by having the slipway. So we've been very careful in our site design and selection to make sure we can accommodate and keep the fish healthy and well, as any prudent fish farmer would do.
Okay, Mr. Nicola, I do want to move on. Is it essential that? Well, I don't want to cut you out, but
sorry, no, it was just ready to go back to Mr. Hawthorne, just saying the sites that they visited, and just to ask whether they all had waste extraction at 85%.
Well, we'll come on. That's probably an agenda item on its own, isn't it? If I think it's the next one. Yeah, I think that probably is item 4. So let's move on to that. I've read, I think it's your evidence in particular, Mr. Nichol, on this point, but I think also after Clyde, maybe in earlier submissions. Oh, apologies. Mr. Stopford, did you want to come in?
Sorry, no, I was just nodding my head. Yes, the F. Clyde one was probably the first one on discussing the waste issue. Yeah, happy to sort of add into the conversation, but I think you're better in the room in the first instance.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so of evidence in your submissions about this point, I think also in After Clyde, maybe in their earlier written submissions. Before we get into the question of the 85% ambition, the more simple question I had is that, what I put there on the agenda, is there a working example of a fisk cage or other SECS system where waste is pumped to shore? It's just quite a factual position, Mr. Shorten.
Mr. Shorter can deal with both that and the next question, which I think would assist moving the discussion forward.
Thank you, sir. You asked is there an example of a FISC or other semi-closed system where waste is pumped ashore? Yes, there are. There are many. All 30 of the aquafuture systems are capturing waste and they're pumping it ashore, and have been for some years. And my colleague Stuart Hawthorne visited one of these sites as recently as August this year. We're aware of 2 of the 3 30,000 Ecomerden pens operating, which capture waste and pump not ashore, but to a barge in an almost identical manner. The waste on that site is removed by sea rather than by road, but in a slurry. These systems are supplied by FISC, so they are FISC systems. We're aware of other systems that have been capturing waste and pumping it ashore. The Aquafarm Neptune system, which I visited back in 2019 with my colleague Stuart Hawthorne. We're not aware of any of the Certis systems that are fitted to pump waste ashore. However, the FISC system that both Mr Hawthorne and I visited in 2019 and the EcoMerden system that our colleague Christoph Harwood visited in 2018, they were collecting waste from the bottom of the semi-closed pen, but rather than pumping it ashore, they were pumping it out to a more exposed location in the fjord via pipe. Now, one of the reasons why not all the operators in Norway who are using these systems are capturing the waste ashore and removing it from the site is that, as we understand it, the Norwegian licensing regime does not put a lot of focus on the impacts of solid waste deposition to the seabed, which is completely unlike Scotland, where the licence from SEPA is highly focused on the impact to the seabed from the solid waste deposition. Now, if I may move on, sir, to Mr Nicholl's calculations, I can comment on those too. I've looked at Mr Nicholl's calculations, and I believe he's referenced the English translation of the Act for Future report. I've used the mass balance calculation that is recommended by SEPA, and which is used to regulate the Scottish industry. And that mass balance calculation has been verified hundreds of times through the deployment of sites up and down the west coast of Scotland. And that number represents approximately 13% of the waste generated, double to what Mr Nicholl has calculated. But I accept that that is not the same waste that we will catch at the Beinn proposal. In that Act for Future research paper, and I do appreciate there's a number of different page references up and down that English translation, but if you look at section 5.5, Summary of Evaluation Points, which is on page 61 of 68, this is APP 6.53, you can see the plans that Act for Future report to further optimise that waste capture system. And so when my colleague Mr Hawthorne visited the Act for Future site in August, we were told that they were capturing now the waste which represents approximately 40% of the total waste after implementing those measures, and there are now plans to significantly increase this again, but this is entirely a voluntary measure. There's no requirements for them to capture waste under their Norwegian licence, as there are, for example, to eliminate sea lice. And this is why most of their efforts have gone into growing high-quality fish with no sea lice, with capturing waste as a secondary measure. Now, with our projects, capturing waste is equally important to stopping the sea lice, to stopping the escapes, to farming healthy fish. And so we've brought in an incredible amount of expertise across all aspects of the design to ensure that we can do it. Zero Waste Scotland provided a grant to Simply Blue Aquaculture to investigate the feasibility of the waste capture, the processing and the utilisation. This is APP 6.41, sir. We have followed the recommended next steps set out in section 7.3, which is on page 31 for your information. Following this report, we've then worked further with the industry and the supply chain to ensure that the waste can be captured, can be processed and can be utilised in a circular economy application. And so that includes the design of the feed, it includes the shape and the positioning of the bottom ports in the pen, it includes the flow rate through the bag, it includes the pump rate, the type of pump, the timing of the pump, and the foreshore equipment. I've project managed this activity, sir. My previous roles were in oil and gas industries, and I specialised in particle separation and filtration technologies. And lastly, sir, may I say, we have a car licence. The waste capture methodology and results for all the modelling that was included in that application process were accepted by SEPA at each step. The licence has now been granted, and that licence also contains controls on how that licence is monitored and any action they can take with non-conformance.
Sorry, thank you. And before I go back to other parties to see if they want to comment on that further, I might as well just ask you about the third question I had. do you know whether a waste management licence would be required to be obtained from SEPA as well as a car licence?
Yeah, thank you, sir. No, we do not need a licence to hold the waste on the shore. The contractors that we employ will hold all the correct licences for the transportation and the utilisation of the waste.
Okay, thank you. Mr Nicholl, and you can bring in Mr Stopford if you want to. But
yeah. Do you want to go first, Robin, or?
Sure. No, very happy to. I assume you can all hear me okay. Mr Schotter, thank you for your comment on the mathematics. I think whether it's 7 or 13%, probably as you say, doesn't make a huge difference. Fantastic that AgriFutures have managed to increase that in 2 or 3 years from 13 to 40, if that's the right way of calculating it. But that's still a long way from 85. And I suppose part of the challenge we have in sort of understanding the system is it's meant to be, having read all of the planning documents, a FISC 30,000, sorry, FISC Certus 30,000 system that is going to be collecting that waste. And yet suddenly it's not necessarily FISC or the Certus 30,000, but something that does something similar. And therefore we should think about any system that collects waste. Even if you expand it to that, no system is today collecting that level of waste. And I think as Mr. Johnny, you described a moment ago, there are still an awful lot of new things that are being tried out, new approvals being granted to see if the system works. I have spoken to 2 fish farmers in Norway. Both of them would say they don't collect anything like what they would like to in terms of the waste because the systems aren't as effective. I think, however we think this through, recognising that it is new and innovative is important. And
sorry, I don't know if you can hear me, Mr Stopford, but you've frozen for us. So I'll maybe pause. I'll maybe pass on to other of Mr Nicholl's witnesses, and we'll come back to Mr Stopford when he's back with us. Or will you? Sorry, Ingo.
Sorry, I just think that one, and this probably goes to the heart of this application, is that initially 4,000 tonnes was applied for, and it's down to 3,400 or thereabouts. And just in my head, how this whole development is going to pan out is that there is a huge amount of infrastructure required in order to farm your first salmon. And if you find that the figures stay at 40%, say, or 50% or 60%, that does not allow you to farm fish because SEPA will stop you. So this could end up being a huge white elephant because you've not got any proof that you can do it.
So perhaps I can respond to that, because Mr Nicholl puts it very fairly. We are taking, if you like, the risk that we won't satisfy SEPA, and SEPA quite rightly could close us down if we don't reach the levels that we suggest we should reach. But in that worst case basis, the fish farm won't stay there. There will be a decommissioning bond and process, and the sea farm will be removed. I don't think there's much difference between us in the sense that if we don't reach that, fish won't be produced.
I think that's a very cynical way of approaching it.
Well, let me cut short that because Mr Stopford is back. We lost you. It was all going so well. I think where my notes ended, where you said you'd spoken to 2 fish farmers in Norway and they're not collecting nearly as much waste as they'd like, and that's where we ended. So carry on.
The joys of technology. My apologies to the group, and thank you, sir. So no, I mean the 2 fish farmers I've spoken to, I think I've said they are not yet collecting the waste they'd like to. One of them is pumping it into deeper water, and of course you then end up in the concern of the waste that then is collecting underneath these pens. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to understand. And of course, all of the modelling that was done either for closed systems. At least, Mr. Schotter, you may have some details that we aren't aware of, or perhaps have missed. But everything I've seen is at least either modelled from open pens, which has very different flow characteristics, or from closed pens, which of course also have different flow characteristics because you can capture everything. If somebody has modelled this for this sort of a pen in a sensible fluid dynamics manner, I'd love to see it, because I think that's one of the critical questions here.
May I respond to that, sir? Computational fluid dynamic modelling was undertaken as part of the car licence application. The methodology, as I said previously, was approved by SEPA, and as were the results. We modelled a range of different particle profiles, and we used one which was representative, if not conservative, of the range. We moved ahead with that. So that's modelling what's inside the pen, and that helps drive how the modelling is carried out outside the pen and the deposition and any seabed impact. So that was carried out. The summary of that modelling was provided with the application, and the detail of that modelling was shared with SEPA.
Can I respond on that? Sorry, just because I think the assumptions that you took in that modelling to get to 85% waste capture required a certain particle size falling to the bottom as at the rate at which it was falling in an open pen with the same fish density that is an open pen. If you've got more than double the fish density in the turbulence that is created there, and outlets which are in different places rather than just going straight across as you would model in an open pen, you ought to have a different set of fluid flows. I didn't see anything in those results that showed any modelling of those differences. There may have been that wasn't shared in the summary, but just, you know, and if there was, my apologies. I'd love it if you could show me and educate me.
I wonder. We're in an area of expertise that's far from my own. But SEPA is the regulator, and SEPA has authorised the licence. So I suppose my question in advising ministers is, how much can they rely on SEPA as their advisor and regulator to have done diligent work in approving the car licence, and isn't the case that they should be able to rely quite a lot on SEPA discharging their regulatory function in the correct manner? It seems to me, or is it the case that you think SEPA's got it wrong in allowing the car licence?
Far be it for me to say that they've got it wrong, or to take any view on how policy is applied. I'm simply trying to understand how they looked at it, given that it feels like a very different environment. And I think, as Mr. Hawthorne has said, this is a step change in innovation. I don't know if SEPA has seen a similar circumstance or even understood the differences to it. And that, I think it's just really that open question.
Sir, could I address the hearing? Thank you, sir. I've been listening to all that's been said, and I think I would start by saying it's absolutely vital for the ministers in the decision here to reach a view on whether this technology is or is not commercially proven. You know the Park's view, you know that of those in opposition, sir. But we've been discussing divergence of views around the modelling. I don't know much about the modelling of it, sir, but what I can say is that there is a dispute at expert level around modelling, and it strikes me that it is this aspect that needs to be trialled. Has this been trialled? You've got a model, but does it work in practice? And this really strikes at the heart of, I think, of the appellant's case, because their proposal is to roll this out at considerable scale. And I think where we are is that there isn't a working example of the FISC system where waste is pumped to shore. There's modelling's been done, and it might work, but it might not, sir.
Can I ask a question about that? If SEPA is the primary regulator, wouldn't you expect SEPA to be the body to decide this has to be trialled rather than through a planning application?
One would hope so, sir, but could you perhaps just turn to APP 6.14? and 14, which is the car licence. Okay, if you can go to section 2.4.4, which is the.
I'm just trying to find it. I think I've probably got it as a core document, so just bear with me.
If you put the word 85% into your sort of search and search for that.
I've been too clever and put things in different folders, so that's not going to work. So what was the app reference was?
APP 6.14, I think it's, which is the car licence.
Okay. All right, okay, so it's CD 1.036 if anyone's using that money. So, yeah, okay, so, right, I've got that now. So where am I looking?
2.4.4.
Okay.
Right, you have that. So that's the conditionality of the car licence that is, I think, seeking to control the capture of the waste. And the question you asked me is the extent to which you or the ministers can put confidence in SEPA having looked at this and have issued the licence. But if one examines the condition that they've imposed, it doesn't in fact require that 85% of the waste is captured. If you actually read it, sir, it's a very loosely worded condition which says each fish pen must be installed with infrastructure designed to capture 85% of the waste. It does not say that 85% of the waste must be captured. So it is, I think, very much in the sort of parlance of an unenforceable condition. I think if SEPA were putting a stricter condition, we'd have a degree of confidence in that, sir. But looking at the condition they've imposed on such a critical aspect of the development, I do not share your immediate confidence in their level of control over this vital aspect of the development.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I hadn't seen any reference to that. I don't think to that point about the way that condition is drafted, and I've not. I don't have time to look through the other four corners of the document, but I don't know if there's any immediate response to Mr. McKee's point there about the way that condition is worded.
Yeah, I'm growing increasingly concerned about the number of points Mr. McKee's raising that aren't in the Park's reasons for objection. He ran together, and it's very important to understand the Park's case in this, 2 points about something being commercially proven, which the Park says it's not in support of its case about escapes, and something which, such as the extent of waste capture, which is I think accepted to be different from Norway. So they're two different matters. The Park has no objection on the basis of the issue we're now discussing. I don't know the authority on which Mr. McKee raises this point. They haven't raised the point on conditions before. As I understand it, the conditions on this point are agreed. And thirdly, and no doubt we'll both deal with this more in closing submissions, the seabed standards are set out in some detail in the SEPA licence in Schedules 4 and the environmental monitoring process in Schedule 5, for example, which will ensure that the standards are kept. If Mr. McKee or the Park is seriously suggesting that SEPA's licence and the condition in terms of conditions is illegal because it's so uncertain, we will no doubt hear that in his closing submissions, and we can respond likewise.
Thank you, Mr. Finlay. I was simply responding to the reporter's question, which was, is it not the case that he and the ministers can be satisfied on what SEPA have said in issuing the note licence? I've simply identified that the key condition is unenforceable, and I think you know that.
Okay, so we'll just go that way. So, Ms. Hartnell-Beavis.
Yes, thanks, sir. I don't know about the legality of the situation, but Mr. Shotter was referring to the Aquafuture technology, which I believe is patented. But they have produced, as we all know, a very extensive report, the one that was translated from Norwegian. We got 67%, they got 13%, that's great. It took them 3 years to reach 40%. If SEPA were granting their licence on 85%, and on that only saying that they could have 3,425 tonnes instead of the 4,000 they applied for, what tonnage would they be allowed to have, one wonders, at 40%?
Just a couple of points. Just coming back to CFD, and it's a question I asked a long time ago, and I never got a response from anybody. I don't know whether the analysis was 2D or 3D, and if you do 2D and then you do 3D, there are very often very significant differences in the results you get. Just moving on to the licenses issued by SEPA. The licence they've issued for this fish farm followed issuing a licence to the proposed fish farm at Ardentini, which was an open net system. And I also asked the question as to whether these sewage concentrations were considered together, and whether the flushing of the loch, which is very slow, could cope with that degree of sewage into the loch. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So at the beginning of the afternoon, I wrote down Mr. Hawthorne's evidence that he didn't have any specific locations that he could give us all as to where this is working. So it's very helpful now to hear from his colleague, Mr. Shotter, that he's visited one of them last month. So that's splendid, because it means clearly he can give us the address of the one that's working. My second point is that if on their case the best evidence they can come up with is a 40% waste capture, we are a very long way off 85%. Next, we are still only dealing with solid waste, and nobody has taken up my challenge that nothing the appellant has told you deals with the liquid waste. It also hasn't dealt with what seems to me, and I may be quite wrong, to be a very practical problem. What happens when your dead fish sink to the bottom of the pen and block your outflow pipe, the outflow pipe being one of the few areas of this model that does not have a backup as far as I can see? So how do you deal with that? It's clear that fish do sink to the bottom because their own evidence talks in other systems about seals grazing underneath on the bottom of the pen on the dead fish. And finally, just really a question, and this is my ignorance. You've just been told there is no need for a waste management licence to hold waste on shore because the contractors we use have the required licence to transport waste. Now, those are two very different things, aren't they? Storage on store and transport. And if you are being told that up to 85% of the faeces will be stored for at least 8 days if there's a problem with moving it out, I just raised the question, is it really right that there's no form of regulation as to that? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was really just the factual information that I was asking for. It just occurred to me, would this need a waste management licence? In respect of the fish blocking, my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the fish would be at the bottom of the net, but then there's a gap between the bottom of the net and the bottom of the outer membrane, so where the sump is and where the pump would be, so that the fish would be inside the net rather than at the bottom where the pump is. But I think
so
that's
that
my
doesn't work
understanding.
if you're collecting your solid waste. There has to be something that's wide enough to collect the solid waste, not inside the net. But no doubt the experts...
I assume it goes through the net because it's a net, and therefore it's collected at the bottom. But then, I don't know if you want to respond to the other point.
So there's been a few things raised here. I mean, just on SEPA as the regulator, I mean, they are the regulator here, and to your point, they're the ones who are responsible for checking what we've submitted is valid and issuing a license. I mean, I've talked to SEPA about their responsibilities, and what they've said to me is they cannot issue a license unless they are certain that there won't be any environmental harm. So it's a very high bar with SEPA to be before they'll issue a license. But if they get it, if there was to be an error, and the seabed impact under the license they've issued was to be worse than expected, then they already have the regulatory tools at their disposal to require us to reduce production or indeed stop production. So I do feel this is a bit of a red herring. Someone earlier talked about there seems to be a dispute among the experts. I don't think anyone else here is a CFD modelling or waste modelling expert. And so I don't see what the dispute between experts is. I see there's a concern among lay people. But SEPA are experts in modelling, and they've said they've reviewed and approved the process of modelling waste both within the system and waste that is discharged from the system, and have deemed it appropriate, as well as the people who were doing the modelling, looking into the different ways of capturing waste. And I would say, for me personally and for people involved in this project, capturing waste is a big part of the difference that we want to make. We want to make a difference to the environment in this development, but also to demonstrate it so that we can have improvements across the whole of the aquaculture sector. Now, how much weight does this hearing have on improvements across the sector? It's probably not huge, but it should be part of the consideration of the Scottish Government when it goes to ministers about addressing the concerns that people have. There's a huge opportunity to capture organic waste products that right now just go into the marine environment. And, if this project doesn't go ahead, it's a roadblock to positive change rather than facilitating change when we're in the middle of a nature crisis and a climate crisis. And, folks, come on, we want to make a positive difference. We're being very careful with what we're doing here. The park should be, you'll be proud of this development when we get going. That's our job, to make you proud of us, and we certainly will be trying to do that. Thank you.
I'd really like to move this is item 4 out of 10 or 12. Is there anything in detail that you need to tell me about?
One question from a very lay perspective. I have an issue more to do with the transport on using that road. Why have you decided not to remove the species by boat? Why, you said that some places they do that. Why in this instance have you decided not to do that?
Sorry, to answer your question, we do plan to remove by boat. So that is part of the project plan, and we hope to do that in the future. When we started with this project and we looked at the availability of both road and sea transport of waste, we felt that the road was the better choice to begin the project with. But the project has a slipway, and we hope that in the future, and we're dealing with various contractors now that boat waste around Scotland, that this may be possible. But for the purposes of the EIA, we had to assume the worst case scenario, which would be transporting out by road.
Okay. Can I move on to the next? In fact, what I was going to suggest is it might be time to take a short break, and then we can come back on benthic impacts and water column impacts, and we can maybe do them together. It's similar to item 3. I don't have any particular questions, but these have been raised in some of the objector statements, both benthic impacts and water column impacts. So I wanted to give the appellant the chance to respond, and then for the objectors to respond to that if they wanted to. But I'd take them together or separately, whichever's easiest. But maybe if we stop for 10 minutes and come back at 3:05 and start with item 5, is that okay for everyone? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's just gone 3:05, so hopefully we can just start again. Mrs. McLean has left, but Ms. Wright has stepped in on behalf of the Clyde, so hope that's okay for everyone. I was going to go on to items 5 and 6. There's a lot of overlap in some of these things, and so I think we've covered quite a lot of these issues already. So I'm hoping we can get through the rest of the agenda items a bit quicker so that we can get finished in the time that suits everyone. So on benthic impacts and water column impacts, certainly the first of those, if it relates to waste, then we've talked a lot about that already, and water column impacts. So I just wanted to give, as I said, I wanted to give the appellant the chance to respond if there's anything else that we've not covered on those two issues. But I suppose my kind of question overarching both of them is about regulators, and isn't SEPA the primary regulator for both those effects as well? So I'm interested in that point, but also if there are other issues to add, then I'll give the appellant the chance to do that now. If there's nothing else to be added to what you've already said, then that's fine. But I just want to make sure I've not given you that opportunity under these two items.
Thank you, sir. I would like to add just one or two more points on the benthic impacts, and then move on to the water column impacts, as it seems to be some concern from Ms. Malcolm. So the EIA that was undertaken by ARCIS, who are now ERM, they assessed the residual effects on benthic habitats as negligible and not significant, which is EIA Chapter 11, Section 11.12, sir. The NPA, National Park Authority, acknowledged in the report to their board, Section 8.17.9, that it can therefore be concluded that there would be no adverse effects on priority marine features in compliance with Environmental Policy 5. NatureScot and their representation at planning, which is APP 2.6, have also not raised this as a concern. And we have discussed, as you said, sir, the benthic impact was assessed in full by SEPA through the car licence application process, which took approximately 2 years. We have discussed the CFD modelling, so I won't go back into that one. Regarding the deposition model, which is the modelling which tracks the fate of the waste once it's lost from the pen onto the seabed, there are a number of assumptions that are built into the standard model itself so that the outputs are conservative. For example, the biomass sits at the maximum biomass for the entire period of the model, when in reality, of course, you start off with very low stocking density when the fish are small. You grow over the first year, and of course there's periods where you're fouling where there's no biomass in the enclosures at all. The deposition modelling that was carried out for this proposal was done by the software developer themselves, which is SAMS, the Scottish Association for Marine Sciences, and that was submitted as part of the EIA, which is Report Volume 3, Technical Appendix 11.4. And if you look at Section 3.2.1, it states a biomass of 3,450 tonnes would consistently pass the SEPA environmental quality standards, which are all about the impacts on the seabed. Stuart Hawthorne has already talked about how SEPA issue these licences and the confidence that they have to get to before when making that decision. And of course, modelling is a standard and accepted way to achieve that confidence used across a number of industries. And we've already talked about SEPA having the regulatory power to reduce production if the seabed impact is more than anticipated, which would be discovered during the ROV surveys that we have to do every other year. And the National Park Authority have confirmed that in their report to the board, saying the controls in place by SEPA car authorisation mean that there would be not a significant adverse effect on the benthos, the priority marine features, or the nutrient enhancement, and these aspects of the water environment would be protected. That's section 8.17.10. SEPA themselves, when they issued the licence, joined us on a press release. It was a joint press release, APP 6.43, and they stated that semi-closed containment systems such as that proposed by Loch Long salmon have the potential to play a significant role in enhanced sustainability through reduced medicine use and discharge. I did want to raise one more point, sir, that in practical terms, it's not our intention to immediately start operations at the maximum allowed biomass that permit permits. Our intention is to build up to approximately 2/3 of that allowable biomass over the first year or two, and then build up to full production by approximately year 3 or 4. And this will enable us to monitor the seabed and ensure that any impact is not beyond what's been modelled. It also allows us to ensure that all the other operating and monitoring programs are functioning well prior to reaching that maximum biomass. And should the impact on the seabed be above what we expect at that lower biomass, it would give us time to adjust our operations accordingly, so that once we do get to maximum biomass, we're not depositing more than the licence permits. And so I would like to go on the water column impacts too, but maybe that's a good point to pause.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just give other parties a chance to respond, and then maybe we can move on. To say let's not go over what we've already heard earlier. But Mr. Nicholl, did you want to?
Yeah, could I just pick up on what the Shot has just said regarding the way that they're going to operate the farm? There's nothing in the planning consent that insists you do that. You could go straight in to farm 3,400 tonnes of biomass. You're saying there's no planning condition there in that.
Again, I think that's correct. Mr. Nichols is correct. If, as Mr. Shot has given an explanation of why they wouldn't do that, but if they did that and then breached the condition, then, although I know you described this in negative terms before, the risk would be that the farm would be closed down. So that's why the sensible approach is being taken of building it up.
And the only other thing that I would say is, what is that modelling based on? Is it based on 35 kilograms per cubic metre, or is it based on 50 kilograms per cubic metre in your farm management plan?
If I may respond to that, sir. The modelling on the seabed is not based on a given stocking density. It's based on the maximum allowable biomass of the site split between the various pens. So that's how the deposition modelling works.
Understood.
May I just say, Mr. Shotter explained that the maximum biomass wouldn't be operated from the beginning. Naturally not, because the fish have to grow. So you have to stock at a lower density to begin with anyway. It's not necessarily being particularly careful or...
Well, you're correct that the fish start off, the stocking density is very low while the fish are small. And so by the very nature of farming, you have a year until you hit your maximum biomass where you can ensure that you're collecting your waste. But that's not what I meant. What I meant is we would complete a number of production cycles at that 2/3 biomass before starting again with the small fish and bringing them up to the maximum allowed biomass.
And which production model are you talking about here? Are you talking about the post-smolt or the full to harvest model?
I think we handle that actually later on, but So I'll wait till we get to that part of the session, please.
Okay, thank you. Was there anything else? I mean, bear in mind, I'll take account of what I've got in writing. If not, then let's move on to item 6, which was water column. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In the environmental impact assessment, which was submitted with the application, the effects of marine water quality were assessed as not significant. That's Chapter 14 of the EIA, Section 14.9, which is the Statement of Significance. And we assessed, or rather ERM, or ARCIS now ERM, assessed the impact from sediment runoff, enhancement from farm waste, or sea lice chemicals. The National Park Authority, they acknowledged that SEPA had corroborated the modelling undertaken through the EIA and have acknowledged that SEPA is responsible for controlling water column impacts. In their report to the board, they've stated this project would not impact the overall combined locational guideline index, and they've stated that in 8.1 or 8.17.4 and elaborated further in 18.17.5 and 0.6. This enhancement index, with our farm assumed to be deployed, is still a Category 3 water body under the Marine Scotland Locational Guidelines, which is the category of least risk. And Marine Scotland have categorised the loch, assuming the cumulative impact of the Beinn Reithe development, plus the cod farm that was never developed, but there was a licence for, and the Ardentini site that I believe Mr McLean was referencing earlier. And in their consultation at planning, which is APP 2.5, under water column impacts, they've raised no issues with the water column quality impacts, and they've stated the model used by Marine Scotland Science to determine the locational guidelines loch categorisation does not account for the proposed waste capture at the site. Therefore, the result is likely to be precautionary in nature, and they've raised no objections. With those water column impacts that were assessed at the car licence application, we also assumed 4,000 tonnes rather than 3,452, so it seemed to be additionally conservative. I am happy to take you through the nuts and bolts of the modelling.
No, I think I'll decline that offer. It's not my expertise, and so it probably wouldn't like me that much. I just wanted to make sure I got that right. In terms of the car licence, the modelling was predicated on 85% waste collection. Did I hear you say there that the modelling used by Marine Scotland Science in relation to kind of water column impacts, it doesn't assume that it's based the same as a normal open fish farm? Is that right?
That's correct, sir. They assumed no waste capture.
Okay, thank you.
So if I may just elaborate, the water column impacts are associated with the nitrogen discharge, and that is well controlled and well modelled throughout the car licence process. There was questions about a 3D and a 2D model. We did the 2D model. SEPA also did a 3D model to verify that there'd be no impact. And subsequent to us getting that licence, another open net farm has been approved further south in the loch, which should be additional nutrients on top of our own.
Okay, and excuse my chemistry, but when you say nitrogen discharge, is that liquid waste that was being referred to earlier on?
That's correct, sir. That's correct.
Okay, I don't know if there's any point.
Yes, talking about the nitrogen and ammonia, as in the urine waste, they can upset the marine environment around the cages. And in fact, in the Act for Future report, that you submitted. It says, through the development project, we have shown that the microbial environment on and in the immediate vicinity of this site is affected by the operation of the plant. This means that the fish can be exposed to infectious substances from the environment with the intake of untreated water from a depth of 20 metres, for example, from agents such as accompany the fish to the site at release. That's not relevant. Over time, these may accumulate the infectious substances during the production period, similar to what we have demonstrated in nearby environment on the site and in intake water. This is a limiting factor that must be addressed. The English translation is strange here. Other natural biosafety measures such as good location of facilities and dimensioning of production based on local ocean current models, good control of infection status for all groups of fish entering the facility, and 3, regular emptying and set aside of the facility. Now, in your farm management plan, you say that you will be laying the site to fallow for 4% of your production cycle. Is that going to be sufficient in clearing the marine environment of the urine, etc., that's going in? Because if it's not, with climate change and the warming waters, we could end up exacerbating the situation that we have in Scotland at the moment. We have lice, that's one thing, but we also have a huge problem with these microjellies, which are as a result of, we think, warming waters and eutrophication from a nutrient overload of the environment.
So if I just may jump in there, I mean, this is what SEPA's job is to do, and they've got many farms fish farms in Scotland, conventional open net fish farms in Scotland, that they monitor and manage all the time, and they've assessed this site on the same criteria as that, and they've assessed it as not having an impact on the eutrophication level of the loch, and I think the park has accepted that as correct. I mean, it's all very well for people to be saying, I'm worried about it, but that's why we've got regulations and a regulator who looks after these things to make sure that it's done appropriately. And they do have the power to change their criteria in the future, and there's already a regulatory framework in place that can do that and can manage not just this activity but any others around Loch Long and other lochs in Scotland.
Okay, I'm going to move on to item 7 if I can. It actually picks up, and I think to a certain extent, on the issue you just raised there. So, from Paul Nichols' evidence, there's concern about stocking density, and if I understand it correctly, that heightened density could increase the risk of pathogen, increased pathogen risk. You also make a point, Mr. Nicholl, in your submission, as does After Clyde, I think, about this notion of the re-entrainment of waste having been discharged from the bottom, from the discharge pipes being brought back into the system through the inlet pipes. And so I wanted to give the appellant the chance to respond to that point. But there's a wider question for me, and again, with apologies, it's come back to the kind of regulatory framework. So I don't think we need to go there, but there's a letter from Marine Scotland, it's AP 2.17, which is, I think, during the processing of the planning application, Marine Scotland was asking the Park Authority to ask for more information. And there's a summary at the end, and in the first bullet of that, it refers to the Aquatic Animal Health Scotland Regulations 2009. So I suppose my question is about who is the regulator for fish health, and the clear implication I got from Marine Scotland's letter is that fish health is regulated under those, it's either an act or regulations from 2009. So have I got that right? I mean, so there's a regulatory question, but then there's the more specific ones that I'd raised from Mr. Nicholl and Arthur Clyde.
Yeah, so that is correct, and so that App 2.17 does refer to Marine Scotland's role, and the way they do that is through the issuance of a aquaculture production business authorisation, which they don't and won't grant until after planning permission has been granted. And just for the record, we did note this in Section 5 of our written submission on the scope of other regulatory regimes as well. Fish health and welfare is improved in these systems, and I think there's widespread agreement and understanding of the benefits of semi-closed systems for fish health and welfare. In App 1.17, which is the Farm Analytic Letter, they talk about fish health and welfare. The App 6.12 from Hatch, they talk about improvements in fish health and welfare. Control Aqua Letter to us, they talked about providing this, which is App 1.14, talked about providing good health and welfare. And indeed in Paul Nicholl's statement, they reference could improve fish and health and welfare. And a significant driver of that is related to sea lice and the fact that we don't get populations of sea lice self-propagating and breeding and developing and growing in the farm because we prevent the breeding population from developing. And so that means that we don't ever need to do any sea lice treatments. And so sea lice themselves can affect fish health and welfare, but so can the treatments, which are very stressful events when they're undertaken. Fish can and do die during sea lice treatments, but also their scales, their skin, and the mucus layer that covers their scales and skin can be damaged, which can let other pathogens in. And that's why, as per Paul Nicholl's statement, the semi-closed containment system technology is appealing because it substantially reduces the risk of sea lice entering the cages whilst reducing the risk of escaped stock. So Mr. Nicholl then goes on to talk about unintended consequences, and I just disagree with that point of view. Now, it is correct that we must consider and have due regard for the health and welfare of our stock, and semi-closed containment systems don't solve every issue, but they do offer very significant benefits. So no sea lice, that's the benefits there about treatments as well as no direct harm, stable, consistent oxygen levels, consistent water flows, deeper water, which is chemically more stable, which reduces pH changes and other water chemistry changes, which reduce impacts and stress, less plankton and jellyfish because of that deeper water, not 100% eliminated, but much lower prevalence at those depths. Because these organisms are generally phototactic, which means they go to where the light is. No stress or direct mortality from seal attacks. So again, gives you more robust farmed animal. And also an ability to somewhat modify temperatures by taking that deeper water. It tends to be, or is, more consistent. It doesn't get as warm in the summer and doesn't get as cold in the winter. And salmon are inherently quite boring animals. They don't like exciting changes. They like things to be steady and consistent, and that's when they are the most robust. They like stability and consistency. They don't like change. And then
salmon are boring, I think the fish farmer said.
You need to put your microphone on, Karen.
In their wild state, they travel several thousand miles across the ocean, which I don't find particularly boring. Having been on the ocean myself and not finding it particularly boring.
So as part of the Marine Scotland process with the Aquaculture Production Business Authorisation, we need to provide a veterinary health management plan, and we can't stock fish without that. And we'll also produce a FEMP, a Farm Environmental Management Plan, which again is something that the NPA would have sight of and approve with the input of both Marine Scotland and Nature Scot before we're allowed to stock fish. So there are multiple controls around ensuring good health and welfare outcomes. And our inside that, there's a fish health and welfare section, and that's NPA document 080-005, I think it is. And so in that we have to have a veterinary health welfare plan, vaccinated stocks. These are the sorts of controls that we'll be using. Genetic selection, you can actually select for disease resistance for certain types of pathogens. A biosecurity plan, fallow periods that prevent pathogens building up and spreading between cycles, stocking density limits that we would impose on ourselves, fish health and environmental monitoring, so looking at individual animals as well as the population dynamics and looking at the environment that they're swimming in, and then of course feed and feed management. So all of these things, there's our FEMP, there's the regulatory regime, there's these processes around protecting fish, but semi-closed containment systems provide a better environment for the fish, and I've got a whole bunch of references around from various scientific papers that can support that, but I don't think I need to go into that right now.
Yeah, and I've seen those references in the written evidence. So, do you have anything to say? As I understand Mr. Nichols' point about reentrainment was that in Norway, these are in deeper waters and the inlet pipes are deeper. I think somebody else made the point about an adaptation for Scotland, and I understand the point was making is that the inlet would therefore be closer in terms of the depth to the outlet pipe, and was that the question was, or assertion was, would that mean recirculating the waste?
So, I mean, as I said earlier, I was on an Aqua Future site that was part of that report just the other week, and that site's in 25 metres deep water. So the short answer is no, it wouldn't be an issue. But it is something we have to be aware of. I mean, we're farming animals, so we have to be responsible farmers, and that's why we have all these controls. The government's got regulations they expect us to comply with, which we would do, but we've also got our own internal controls and processes, including the veterinary health management plan, the fish welfare plan, and the VEMP.
I'll do my usual and go that way, Mr. Nicholl.
Mr. Hawthorne said that he was on an Aqua Futures site very recently. Was that the one that had a 67% mortality, citing gill infection and complex gill damage?
Yeah, so I can talk to that. I mean, gill health is an area that does need to be managed and wouldn't be completely solved by semi-closed containment systems. We've consulted with Pharmac Analytic on that and had advice about management controls around that. In fact, where there was the mortality that Mr. Nicholl refers to is in the Aqua Futures report. It says, sorry, Mr. Nicholl's statement, it says the specific reason for this was due to wound problems the fish brought with them from the period from release to large smolt on site. So this was an issue that fish came to the farm with from the hatchery. It was not an issue with semi-closed containment systems, and I did talk to the CEO of Aqua Future and clarify that, and he confirmed indeed that was the case.
Thank you, sir. Just to say that in that very same report, Aqua Future state that the development of wounds and gill infections have been shown to be serious health challenges associated with the detection of a variety of pathogens dominated by AGD. And those did not come with the fish when they went into the cage.
But Aqua Futures have also said that, and I don't have the exact quote from it here, but in that report they've talked about the success of the system, the commercial use of it, and the improved health and welfare of the fish. It's confirmed by Control Aqua. It's confirmed by Pharmac Analytic. It's confirmed by Hatch. There's a broad consensus that the health and welfare of fish is superior in semi-closed containment systems at above the stocking rates that we're planning on using.
Okay, Mr. McLean, and then maybe if we hear both, and then I'll hear back from Mr. Hawthorne, and then I'll maybe move on.
Thank you. I'm just raising the issue that Marine Scotland have designated that this area as one of the highest concentrations of microplastics in Scotland, and I'm just wondering how this relates to fish welfare, and then moving on from that, human welfare, because we're all going to eat the fish. But I've brought it up under fish health and welfare because I think it's a significant issue.
Okay, and Ms. Wright, maybe did you have a question or a point to make?
I have, yes. With reference to your mortality rate, the approximate mortality rate in the open cage fish farming industry at the moment, I understand, is 14.5%, roughly, which at the stocking density would come to something like 578 tonnes of fish per production cycle. Would you be able to say how you're going to reduce that with the semi-enclosed system? The second thing I would like to ask you is, at the stocking rate that you propose, which I think you said was 35 tonnes per square metre, cubic metre. Yeah.
So that's 35 kilos.
Would you be able to get any quality assurance schemes at that stocking rate, stocking density rate?
I can answer. So firstly, the microplastics was the question that you asked. I appreciate you feel it's a significant issue. Marine Scotland Science don't think it's a significant issue. It's not part of their consultation. They've not raised it. They're already fishing in Loch Long. And so in terms of human health, we've spoken to the fishers and we understand that their fish is checked for microplastics by Marine Scotland, and there's no issues that have been raised there with them selling their own fish. The stocking density, or rather the mortality, when you asked, I think you've taken the biomass and multiplied that by the percentage of mortalities, which is not really the case. The percentage of mortalities relates to the individual fish rather than the biomass, and often those fish are much smaller when they die, and so that biomass, that 570 tonnes comes down. But as my colleague Mr. Hawthorne says, the health and welfare shown in semi-closed systems is much improved to open net, and certainly the systems and the operators that we've been speaking to are getting a much improved mortality rate than the number that you reference. The last question you had was on Mr. McLean, I think you raised on accreditation schemes such as the RSPCA. Oh, sorry, Ms. Wright. The RSPCA have been consulted a number of times on this project. They felt that the stocking density that we put forward was entirely reasonable. Their standards allow for a much higher stocking rate on onshore farms. So you've got to remember the stocking density is about appropriate to the environment in which you farm in. So open net, where you've got very little control over the environment, the stocking density is very low. When you've got very high control over the environment, like in these RAS systems, that stocking density can increase and the same welfare can be provided for. We're somewhere in the middle with regards to control, and so somewhere in the middle with regards to stocking density. And the RSPCA have said that when we do our first production cycle, so long as we work with them on that, they will certify the first fish that we harvest. So although the standard right now doesn't include semi-closed, they would make a provision for us. Thank you.
Can I just add as well? I mean, one of the innovations of these systems is to improve the health and welfare of fish. That's one of the core reasons that we're doing this. I mean, I think that we should have much higher survival rates when we're farming fish, and I'm looking forward to bringing that to life.
Mr. Stopford, did you want to come in there?
Sure. Yes. No. There was I guess a question on water quality. I mean, I think one of the challenges is, I guess, is back to your question of modelling. In that, if you're putting all of the extra waste into the loch, does it really create a non-issue? I think you're producing a lot of evidence here, but I think there have been cases where water quality has created problems. We talked about the Canadian example in Clay Court Sound. It's hard to get real information in the industry. I heard that one of the reasons they moved was because they'd had micro jellyfish coming in even at the deeper inlet depth for the second time. I think you're always going to have an issue with this. And Mr. Hawthorne, you said nothing solves it completely, but it is something that needs to be fundamentally thought through. So I'm also I'm sitting on my phone because my iPad has gone down. So I was reaching for a button. I'll try and get back onto my iPad. So I'll duck back in a minute.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, thank you. I'd just like to highlight in the CTRL Aqua report, there is also quite a long section in the technology section about water quality, about inlet water treatment and how difficult that is, especially at these higher volumes of cages. That means microjellies, pathogens, etc., are difficult to exclude from the systems. And as we've heard, if things do come in, you can have mass mortality events. Yes, it seems that in smaller systems, it is better for fish health, but it remains to be seen as the larger systems are definitely still very much at trial stage and often don't, or as far as I can tell, don't have any waste treatment figures or operational data. Now I've lost it. So yeah, no, and the other thing that's in the Control Aqua report is that the water quality sensors are a problem, again, especially for larger systems, that they have problems with sensors then sludging up, and there I'd be very interested in hearing how the water quality will be monitored and what systems LLS might have that were not available to CTRL Aqua in their data that they collected.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you want to add before we move on this issue?
I don't think so. I think we've covered in quite a lot of detail the improvements in health and welfare that come from these systems.
Okay, so I don't think item 8 is sea lice, and I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's going to be take us very long. I think the National Park Authority picked up on the same issue that I did. I just saw there was here and there's a use of eliminating sea lice, whereas and I think you confirmed it earlier, Mr. Hawthorne. What the objective is to greatly diminish them or to minimise them so that they're not a significant issue. It's not a claim that you would never find the sea lice on one of the salmon in the fish farm. Is that, am I getting that right?
That is correct, but and the material matter from a wild salmon protection point of view is we're not adding any sea lice to the loch because we're not creating a breeding population, and it's because they're not breeding that we're not creating a number of sea lice within the farm itself. That then means we don't ever have to treat for sea lice.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it was simply a point of clarification. I wasn't. There's not a wider point that I want to discuss about it. I just wanted to make sure what your evidence was. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Mr. Nichol. Bear in mind, it's not an issue. I feel I need a lot of discussion about. I think I understand the issues in play, but
just a very quick clarification. Two things. Is it not irresponsible not to apply for a licence to treat sea lice if they're found?
I know Ms. Wright was going to ask a question, so same question, right? Okay.
Do you want us to address that?
Yeah.
Yep.
If you want to.
Yep. I mean, first of all, sea lice are controlled. Hundreds of production cycles, no sea lice treatments ever required. In fact, I'd go further than that. They take fish infected with sea lice, put them into these systems, and the sea lice grow old and die and don't reproduce. The systems themselves are an effective treatment for sea lice. I don't think that we need to have any other controls for sea lice. Marine Scotland thought that we should have, and so in our farm environment management plan we do have comprehensive monitoring for sea lice, and if we were to be required to treat for sea lice, we do have certain protocols in there, but I'm very confident that will not be needed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go on to item 9 then, which was about energy use, and again, this is a factual question really. We talked a bit about this earlier on in the policy hearing session. I think it's come up in some of the evidence about the nature of the development that by its nature it's energy intensive, and so I wondered, does the appellant have data or an understanding of what the overall energy requirements are of this operation?
I can answer that one. Just regarding IT, I feel that when I press my microphone, your one is muted. I'm not sure if that's the case or if I'm just hearing that, but in any way. At maximum biomass, the site would use, so that's me, I mean, when we are farming at the maximum biomass, not in those earlier years, the site would use approximately 1 kilowatt hour per kilo of salmon produced, which is what the grid connection has been designed to. That grid connection is not a high voltage connection, it's a low voltage connection. The independent hatch letter, we've referred to this a number of times, but it's APP 6.12 on page 2, reports the same value for the semi-closed containment systems. And that same report attests to the fact that salmon grown on land bases use approximately 5 times as much energy to achieve a kilo of salmon. So in total, we would require approximately an annual of 4.5 gigawatt hours. We have provided evidence in our hearing statement on the greenhouse gas emissions of salmon, farmed salmon, compared to other farmed animal proteins. That's section 2.8 of the nature of the development hearing statement. And we've also provided, sir, on a paper on the various production methods within salmon farming itself. So that's land-based, that's flow-through, that's semi-closed and open net. I don't necessarily want to get into all the detail, but salmon farming compares favourably against the other animal proteins. And within salmon farming itself, semi-closed is seen as the most environmentally friendly. One of the main climate advantages of the semi-closed system is not necessarily the power that's required to produce the fish at site, which might be the Scope 1 or Scope 2 emissions. It's actually the reduction in the Scope 3 emissions, which are the reduced amount of feed required to produce the salmon. And that's because the feed conversion rate is better, and critically, the mortality is lower. And we were discussing this earlier today, but the other aspects of sustainability within the project, which have not really been discussed in great detail, is the proximity to the quarries, both for the material and where the overburden is put, which are close by. Our replanting plan, where we're going to plant more than we need to cut down. The site selection process in the EIA, it's clear that we were looking for a site that would utilise existing infrastructure, which is the road and the grid connection. The power will be provided by the grid connection rather than diesel generators, and that power will be through a green tariff. The work that we do on the road will be upgrading, or rather bringing that road to forestry land specifications, which it's currently not, which includes upgrading all the culverts. We've not talked about the inherent benefit of capturing that waste and using it to create energy. And there was a number of other points about sustainable drainage systems, which are all covered in our outline construction environmental management plan, sir.
May I just ask one question? Was it 1 kilowatt per hour per kilo of fish that you were saying?
1 kilowatt hour.
Per kilogram of fish?
Correct.
I've just been online and I've seen that for an open net pan, it's 2.55 kilowatt hour per kilogram of fish. I don't know whether I might have picked up something that's totally out, but how does that compute?
Well, I'm not sure you've seen that. I can't imagine it's from any electricity used on site, because often there's almost no electricity used, or very little, through diesel generators. But I would refer you to the Hatch letter, which states the power, or rather the energy requirements for both semi-closed and on-land RAS.
So I understand, yeah, your response, the 1 kilowatt hour per kilogram, that's electricity for running the plant. It's not any assessment of wider kind of whole life carbon cost, if you like, or just so I understand what you're saying to me.
That's correct. However, those other considerations are wrapped up in that IRE and TIDMAR paper.
Okay, I don't know if anyone's got any points arising from that, Mr. Nicholl.
Just a very small point. I was talking to a fish farmer up north, and they'd applied for a connection to the grid and were told at least 2 years. What date have you been given?
I don't have that information to hand, but what we do have is a construction program, and the grid is part of that construction program, and that part of it is provided by SSEN, who's the distribution network in this area.
So you won't use generators at all, except in case of a critical failure.
Sorry, just microphone problems. The generators are for a critical failure, i.e. an issue with the grid. So when the grid is down, the backup generators kick in, and there's also backup generators to back up the backup generators too. Now, when working with SSEN, we looked at various types of connection. We were given detail of the number of days that we could expect the grid to be down every year, and it was 1 or 2. And so the size of the grid and the type of the grid connection was designed in conjunction with, or rather in collaboration, I should say, with SSEN.
But they've not given you a date as when they would be able to connect you?
My understanding is that dates... the main issue with getting a grid connection is for generating projects, when you're putting in a wind farm or something like that. That's when grid connections take a long time. This would be considered a small connection, or a smaller connection, a low voltage connection. And certainly within our 18-month construction program, by the end of that, we expect to be energized.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to keep going just now in terms of a break. I'll stop if people feel they're flagging and they want 5 minutes. Be okay to keep going. Let me know if not. So number 10 was the risk of fish escape, and I'd ask just a number of factual questions, I guess, which I'm going to ask the appellant to respond to first. So these were how would any damage to the inner net or the outer membrane become apparent? What kind of human or equipment failure could cause escape? And perhaps the more a value-loaded question is compliance with the relevant technical standard sufficient mitigation of the risk of escape? Now, it might be that we don't need to get into all this fully, because the inquiry session is about the effects on the risk to wild salmon from escape, and so if people feel it's better done in that session, then that's fine. It's just that there is some overlap here with the hearing and the question of the nature of the development. So I'll go over to you, Mr. Hawthorne. But as I say, I'll caveat that with to the extent that you think it's better through the inquiry session, that's fine. But if you're better placed, then I'd like to hear about it.
Yeah, I think Mr. Wright will be relying on kind of what we were saying today. So it's important that we do discuss this. I mean, firstly, I mean, of course, we think the likelihood of escapes is very low. We do have a double protection, and also there's the code of good practice and the FEMP systems that we've got in place to mitigate that risk. Multiple reports that we've already talked about that demonstrate improved escape risk. Paul Nichol agrees at least that it's reduced at page 10 of his statement. And we'll have a FEMP with an escape prevention strategy. So that's certifications, double barrier, stopping seals, prevention of collisions, use of inlet and outlet screens, preventive maintenance, monitoring with CCTV, and processes around stock handling. Just going to your first question is around how would it be identified. So we'd have a mixture of proactive and reactive. So proactive things will be inspections of the nets and the membrane. So we'll have an ROV system, or divers in the case that we don't have an ROV, to check the integrity of every bag and every net every month. And they would include a check of the screened water exit ports and, as well. The internal net would benefit from net washing, which is done again by ROV with cameras on it. There would be underwater cameras in every pen being used for feeding. Now, while they're primarily used for feeding, they can be moved to the side of the enclosures, and you can see the side walls of the nets. And if a hole was detected, it could be dealt with at that point. And then we'd also, in our FEMP, we'll have sort of post-event. So if there's an adverse weather event, if a bag or net was seen to be damaged from some other process, there'd be inspections for the entire farm that would flow from that. So that would be our kind of proactive approach to things. And then reactively would be, with respect to the membrane or the bag, if there was a failure there, the water level would drop, and or the pumps would have to work harder to keep the water level at the correct height. And both of those things can be and would be alarmed, so that we'd be able to detect that. And also the waste capture percentage would reduce. So again, that's something that could be and would be noted by farm operators whose job is to be looking at these things. And while one of those things happen, wouldn't tell you exactly, it could be a pump's not working if the water level goes down. There'll be but if that's not that, then there'll be a checklist that people have to go through to work out what's happening. And then in terms of reactive indicators, I guess if a net's gets damaged and there's a hole in it, you may detect fish in between the net and the enclosure. And again, that would trigger a reactive check of the net with an ROV. And just to be clear, if we would have to, of course, remove the fish that are in between the net, and we'd probably do that. The most likely way of doing that would be with a gill net, so they'd be using aids through that process. You asked, do you want me to move on to the next question around what kind of?
Yeah, why not? I think they go together, and then I'll give other people a chance to respond if they want to.
Sure. So, in terms of human or equipment failure, the primary risk is around fish handling events. So that's fish welfare inspections, which will be taking some fish out of every enclosure every week to check for their physical health, stock treatments, and harvesting or moving fish in preparation for harvest. So, human or equipment failures could lead to an escape event, and that risk, I guess, is to some extent not that different from what you get on open net farms. But we do mitigate that and control that, and we will have in our FEMP ways of doing these things to make sure that we do manage those things. So additional catch netting when you're handling fish around the area where you're undertaking that work. During fish pumping, again, you'll have the pipe going into the pen either to suck fish out or to put fish back in. So you might have your top net lowered down to facilitate that. So again, catch nets in those areas to prevent escapes during those stock handling events is the way we would approach that in the FEMP and with our SOPs. I mean, I would just note that in PPA-002, page 5, the Loch Lomond Angling Improvement Association talk about the escape events and what causes those. And in terms of events that cause the number of events that cause escapes, predator, hole in net, human error and weather are the top 4. But in terms of escaped fish numbers, the list is weather, hole in net, predators and mooring failure. So that it's apparent that the numbers of fish that escape aren't really around stock handling or human error events. The numbers of fish are low if you did have an escape in those sorts of situations. And I think it's probably for others to talk about the risks of that.
Can I just ask Mr. Hawthorne to deal with 2 matters? One, is there any additional advantage of having 2 effective enclosures? And secondly, because it was raised earlier by Ms. Markham, could you explain the difference between seal damage in a single net system and seal damage, or the experience of any potential seal damage in an opaque containment system?
So just to be clear, that wasn't what I raised, and I don't need it explained. I do understand there's a difference.
But even if Ms. Markham hasn't raised it, I'm not sure the parks expert is sufficiently appraised to that issue, and it's a matter I would like Mr. Hawthorne to deal with this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, inherently, and the evidence that's been presented and is available, it's very clear that these systems prevent escapes. The Control Aqua document we've already referred to, the letter from Control Aqua to us in 2021. I've talked to Dr. Esmark recently, and she confirmed to me that statement from her 2021 letter to us still stands, that these systems prevent escapes. And of course, if you compare to what we are doing with a conventional open net farm, there's no real way of saying the risk isn't substantially reduced, if not eliminated, by doing what we're proposing. And then with respect to predators, which is often referred to as one of the causes of escapes, seals primarily are visual feeders, and so they can't see through this membrane, and so they will move on. And I would have to say, in my 30 years of farming fish practically, not just in Scotland but in environments where you've got much more agile pinnipeds, sea lions, that you just need to be a little bit more tough than going and feeding naturally, and then they'll move on. And we're not just a little bit more tough with our double barrier, we're much more tough. And you won't have seals gnawing on dead fish on the bottom of the net, because they can't get to the net because there's a bag in the way. So there's lots of inherent advantages in what we're doing that just make the escape risk significantly lower.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Hawthorne. We are obviously we'll be discussing this issue again from Thursday, but I don't know if there's any responses anyone wanted to make to what Mr. Hawthorne had to say there.
Sir, thank you for that, Mr. Hawthorne. Could I maybe just start by asking a question about numerically, how many smolts or small salmon are going to be contained in each of the 4 cages, and you've got the 5th cage, which is the entry to harvest, just so we can get some idea. Mark Shotter has helpfully said that you're going to, if you get permission, to sort of scale up the project, but you'll be running at sort of 2/3. So what numbers are we dealing with? Because I think that's quite important.
Yeah, in the entry to harvest mode would be about 300,000 fish in one enclosure, and in the post-smolt mode there'd be about 900,000 fish in one enclosure.
Sorry.
300,000 in entry to harvest and 900,000 in post-smolt rate.
So that's 3.6 million.
Well, 2.7, I guess, in the post-smolt model, and 1.2 in the entry to harvest.
And that'd be 4 times 9.
I concede that my mathematics was not my strong point, so thank you very much for that clarification.
I'm going to defer to my colleague, Fiona Stewart, sir. I just wanted to get that sort of baseline of information, which I thought was really important, and we'll be returning to this in the inquiry session for sure.
Okay, I just wanted to say, sir, that it's damage to any of the equipment that's of major concern for us because of the issue of, fish escape. And it's all about location, and it's in view of the importance of the Clyde here, for spawning fish, migrating fish, in view of the River Endrick, a special area of conservation, and the fragility of the Endrick water, and the qualifying feature of Atlantic salmon. So it's very important to us that it's clear and there is evidence that the equipment is going to be, stronger and better. But I just want to draw everybody's eye to the fact that the FEMP, the Farming Environment Management Plan, which is, I think it's PPA-002, has said within it that divers and ROV operators will be checking, the nets every 30 days. Now, bearing in mind that obviously the FEMP can evolve and it can change, it's the Code of Practice suggests that, which is in play at the moment, that equipment is checked on a daily basis. That's within, I think it's Appendix 7 within the Code of Practice, but that hasn't prevented escapes happening. Now, I know that that's open net I'm talking about, but it has not prevented that happening. So what I would ask is, considering it was 2015 that the FEMP came into play, and it doesn't appear, with the details that we have from NATCO Scotland's PPA-002-2020 regarding the number of fish escapes, just what the real difference would be with the FEMP for the semi-closed. What would you ask that it be tightened up in order to stop fish escapes, and how that be relevant to your system? Because what we can see is that with the semi-closed containment, you're going to have an extra barrier. It's going to be much larger. We know about the fragility, and this will be discussed, at the PLI, but we know about the fragility of the salmon population, not just in the Endrick water, but the salmon rivers around. So just what can you do to stop the fish escaping? Because at the moment, 30 days, a check for the net, the fish would all be gone, by that time. And even on a daily basis, just how can you prevent the fish escaping in this sensitive location?
Can I just ask a question before I give the appellant the chance to respond? You said a code. You referred to a code of practice there. Do you mean, is that the technical standard, or is that no? Right.
Mr. Hawthorne referred to. It's the Scottish Finfish Code of Practice.
If I could maybe just come in a little bit. I mean, it seems to boil down, the appellant's case seems to boil down to the durability of the outer bag. I appreciate there are other, checks and balances that can be imposed within that. But I think your question in Agenda 10 is a good one, which is how would damage become apparent in either the outer or the inner? And we assume that, damage would probably have to come from the outer, and then it would work its way to the inner. And we do have the evidence that predator attack is probably the most frequent cause of mass escapes. But I think it's to do with the speed of reaction and being able to react to a sudden catastrophic failure resulting in, potentially the release of, 900,000 smolt, shall we say, just from one of the cages. And it's one thing about, putting divers down and inspecting. What happens if it's bad weather? What about the visibility of the water? How quickly can divers be marshalled? Are they going to be there? Is there going to be a 24-hour, all-night watchman present on this thing? So that's a concern for the park as well. But it also goes down to what is the difference in engineering terms, I should say, between the semi-closed and the open net. The only difference is really the outer bag, as far as I can see. There doesn't seem to be any aspects of the semi-closed system that have any greater over-engineering. For example, it's got incredibly or much stronger moorings. It's made with stronger metal or components. For so on and so forth, sir. So it just seems to pin down, the hopes are all that this bag's going to work. And the question is, will it work? What evidence underpins that? And I think we do have some attestations to say that seal attacks may be held off by the bag, but I don't really think it's evidence that, certainly from the park's point of view, that they feel they can rely upon in terms of the overall sort of competence of the structure from such an attack. I'll kind of pause there, sir, having had a fair opportunity of speaking.
Okay, thank you. So, is it all about the bag? Is that to put that short?
So, well, Ms. Stewart talked about it's all about location, and this is a very good location, in particular for rolling this technology out. It's a very sheltered location, and it's one of the positives of developing at this Beinn Reithe location in the first place. Now, there's all this concern about the bag I'm hearing from Mr. McKee, but we don't just have a bag. We've got a bag and a net. Both these things have to fail at the same time. And I don't understand. Mr. McKee was talking about how we won't get a warning of it, but in fact, if the bag fails, I just talked about the warning systems we'll have in place. There's not a single open net farm in Scotland that has an alarm if there's a breach in their outer containment. We'll have alarms that tell us if there's a breach in the outer containment that can detect that. It'll be the first time ever that that's been done in Scotland. But the bag does work. Control Aqua have concluded that these systems have been proven to prevent escapes. I feel that there's an unreasonable concern being generated about something that's been well established. So probably that's what I've got to say at this point.
So can I add to that the issue of lack of seal predator damage is something that is not a new claim, but it's by the appellants that's set out in the EIA, and it passed without comment in the officer's report or by the park. And the mechanics of seal damage, which Mr. Hawthorne has explained, simply won't occur on the opaque system, and there's no evidence to suggest otherwise.
Can I just add one other thing as well, sir? These systems in Norway, where they've got both open net systems and semi-closed systems, have got what's called a higher reliability class under their system, and that's because they've been shown to prevent escapes. And so they're allowed to hold greater numbers of fish, and that's another reason that gives me confidence that I can sit here genuinely talking about the benefit from an escape point of view.
So I fear we might be dwelling into the inquiry session, but we do have the evidence of Colin Adams, who says that obviously seals do not solely hunt by visual means. There are seals in Loch Long. There's no doubt about that. And the park's position is that the standard of the evidence that's being produced is simply not high enough, given in this case the fragility of the Endrick Water SAC and protecting it from a mass escape.
Okay, I mean, we'll maybe get into that particular point at the inquiry.
Thank you, sir. Just one question, because we've talked an awful lot about the net and the bag, but there is the ring around the outside, which is, I think, steel. And we know that there are a lot of instances where wellboats, etc., have gone into nets causing damage. Is that steel outer ring, bearing in mind that the other fish Certus cages, as they were being delivered to site, collapsed, is that steel outer ring going to be able to withstand any impact from a wellboat? Human error, it can happen.
I mean, if it was HMS Elizabeth, perhaps not. But you can't rule. I can't sit here and rule absolutely everything out forever. But what I can say is these will be well-engineered systems that comply with the technical standards, and in fact comply with the higher, if they are higher, the Norwegian technical standards, which have been shown over time to be reducing escapes, and that the systems have been through research over many years have been shown to prevent escapes.
Can I just ask Mr. Hawthorne, because he won't be at the Wednesday session, comment on whether there's any difference between seal attacks in Scotland and Norway and likely predators in Norway?
No, although the seal or sea lion pressure in Canada is much, much greater, with much more aggressive, much larger, much more agile animals. And I would say that there's less systems. There's one system in use over there. It's perhaps not the best example, but there's been no issue with predators in that jurisdiction either.
May I just add to that? Sorry. Apologies. Thank you. There's going to be navigational markers around the site as well to prevent such collisions. And I think we've been discussing a condition about such navigational markings with the National Park Authority. Sorry. We've also got the standard operating procedures of the wellboat operators, etc., etc. The collars themselves are bulkheaded too, so if there is damage to a single component and that floods, that doesn't compromise the integrity of the entire collar, and so they're designed specifically to minimise this type of risk.
Which, if I could just add, is different from sort of plastic circle technology, which is open, which doesn't have containment within the circles.
So you mentioned alarm systems and navigational lights. These would obviously be ready to go and or on 24/7 in the national park.
We'll be getting into that tomorrow, I imagine, if people want to raise that as a landscape and visual effect. Right, you had the question, and then maybe
I've got one comment. I wondered if you had taken into consideration the otters on the site. I know there are otters on the site, and I know they have had issues with open net fish farms with otters. And I'm just saying that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yes, of course, and so protection from and preventing interaction with otters would be something that will be considered in our fin.
Sorry, you made a comment that there have been large escapes in other fish farms, suggesting they were from broken nets and things. And human error actually it's a sort of drip feed of a few fish escaping that have actually affected wild fish in Scotland as much as the large escapes. based on maturity of the salmon in the salmon farm as well. I just want to make that comment. I'm sure it will be covered on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to go on to item 11, which is really a question for Mr Nicholl. You'd said in your... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, sir. I didn't realise we'd left technical standards, so I think it...
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. I just... yeah, I'm happy to talk about it on Wednesday and Thursday, but...
Well, I think we will be talking about them, but I don't think Mr Wright is a... Is he an engineer, or does he have experience of the, the compliance or efficacy of these standards? So I think it is a relevant topic for today. I think maybe a relevant topic also for Mr Wright and the inquiry, sir. But we have some comments to make on that, to which the other side may wish to respond, sir. You've posed your question: is compliance with the technical standards sufficient mitigation to deal with the risk of escape? I think from our point of view, sir, we are not certain that the technical standard 2015 has been thoroughly checked to make sure that it is applicable to semi-closed systems. We do have the letter from Marine Scotland, and one might sort of infer favourably from that they are giving a blessing to the application of that standard, but they don't actually say, we have looked at these systems, or this system, we understand it, and this technical standard is applicable. So there's that question mark hanging over it, sir. But in terms of compliance with it, I think there's a question behind that about who's enforcing this standard. It may be that these mass escapes, which are in evidence before this hearing and inquiry, are occurring, and the technical standard is enforced, but it does not appear to be preventing these escapes happening. If it were complied with, perhaps it would prevent them, but there's an issue, I think, around the effectiveness of it. What we can say about the efficacy of the standard is that certainly ministers have produced, in at least one of their reports, that's actually their report to the government, I think it's the government's response to the Salmon Farm Interaction Group, and they have certainly suggested regulatory changes to the technical standard by way of criminalising those who breach these standards and using the ensuing fines, if they're convicted and they pay the fine, to then be recycled back into research, which seems like generally a good idea. But it certainly, if they're seeking to do that and criminalise it, it implies to me that they may not be as effective as one would like them to be. In one of the documents, sir, which is, and I would just ask you to have a look at APP 6.8, which is it's actually the Caradale report, the 2022 report. I'll give you a reference for that in a moment, sir. Excuse me. Look it up.
That's APP 6.8.
6.8, sir.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to, if one goes to the executive summary of that document, if you go to the last sentence, sir, which I think is relevant for the purpose of my submission here, it states in there, and it's obviously talking about the release, it says, as such, there is a continuing requirement to strengthen both practical on-site and regulatory regimes to prevent escapes occurring. And that's a publication by Marine Scotland, sir. Should not be taken lightly, but they're clearly asking the question about the efficacy of these standards. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if any of the other parties, objectors, had a point to raise on this before I then go back to the appellant. No. Yeah, over to you if you want to respond to the points Mr. McKee's just made.
So I didn't hear everything Mr. McKee said because I was talking to my colleague, but I mean, in terms of technical standards, the technical standards are really around equipment and moorings. They're not around day-to-day operations. So there's a code of good practice, and there's a requirement for us to have a FEMP and a veterinary health management plan. And Marine Scotland must approve those types of documents with aquaculture production business authorisation, as must the park for the FEMP. So that's the sort of day-to-day operations and month-to-month, year-to-year stuff. Whereas the technical standards are about the equipment and the moorings, and are they fit for purpose? And we've committed to adopting the more stringent of either Scottish or Norwegian. I know that the park said, well, they can't force us to use Norwegian ones, but we can adopt them if they're more stringent than the Scottish ones. They can't adopt them if they're less stringent than the Scottish ones. And just, you know, Mr. Wright's inquiry report, app 8.1, at para 70, he highlights that since the Norwegian standards were brought in, a decline in the number of escapes over time. And then finally, I know I've said this before, but no escapes recorded from semi-closed containment at this time, and we're confident that we can manage that risk really well.
So we'll respond to the other parts. We'll respond to the other parts of Mr. McKee's statements and evidence during the inquiry session.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to move on to point 11, which was a question for Paul Nicol. Mr. Nicol, your evidence refers to a loud chorus of concern within the industry about SCCS. Where is that?
Well, I mean, what we've done is taken the view that the industry, in a holistic way, which not only involves the producers of the fish, it involves the regulatory authorities and all the people that combine in order for fish farms to be able to function. And I think if you look at Marine Scotland in their response dated the 2nd of June 2022, they state semi-closed containment is novel to the Scottish agricultural sector, and adequate descriptions of fish health and welfare in commercial projects on a similar scale to the proposal are not available in peer-reviewed literature. That's PPA-002-2020. Marine Scotland in June 22 say it is difficult to verify the information on the performance of their technology as full data is not available. Nature Scotland say the proposed fish farm will utilise a novel semi-closed containment system which is currently untested in Scotland. As such, there remains a likelihood that the farm could result in sea lice entering the marine environment. Fisheries Management Scotland also stated that they could see clear benefit to the use of the technology once the technology is proven. Also, Knut Nesse, if you excuse my Norwegian, the CEO of Aqua Group, stated very recently in our statement of case, which we've noted, that he thought the technology was not there. Control Aqua reports in August 23 similarly felt that. Dr. Peter Mackenzie, the CERMAC Fish Health Director, also felt that. And those are all in our statements of cases on page 4, 5 and 6.
Okay, so that's helpful. I just wanted to know what it was you were referring to. I've got those references now. Is there anything the appellant would like to say in response to that?
Mr. Shotter, briefly, but we can respond to those references, and I think in a certain extent we have already, but we can respond to them in closing if necessary.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So Salmon Scotland, who are the body representing the industry, have provided 2 letters of support to this particular application. They've also provided technical input and support as we've required it. I believe this demonstrates industry support for this approach and for this particular development. In their letter, they've actually said Beinn project offers an opportunity of national importance. In their September 22 letter, APP 6.6, they state their support for the project in the first line. And in their last paragraph, especially, they said we must welcome innovation, especially that which seeks to demonstrate alternative approaches to farming, which could address some challenges to production and offer an economically viable alternative production system with a simultaneous reduction in environmental impact. They provided a second letter in January 2023, APP 6.19, reiterating their support. And other sector players have supported this application through planning and through the appeal, including Landcatch, who are a small supplier, BOC, who provide the oxygen and the technology to the sector, Biomar, a feed company, Scan Bio. Many of these players were consulted during the project and in fact have been contracted in to help with project design and shape the project. So this includes salmon farmers, fish veterinary health experts, academics, equipment suppliers. The project's also undergone 2 rounds of due diligence, technical due diligence, I should say, carried out by agriculture experts employed by financiers. Loch Long Salmon, we're a member of the Sustainable Aquaculture Innovation Centre Consortium, through which we've recently submitted an application to work with the University in Edinburgh on a biochar project. We're also a member of Salmon Scotland, and just touching on the 2015 standards, technical standards, these have been written for both open net and for semi-closed as well. So I can't see the loud chorus of industry concern. In fact, we've been encouraged by the industry throughout this project and supported.
Sorry, Mr. Nicholl, did you want to come back on that?
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think British Oxygen probably would support it. I think probably Landcatch would also support it in terms of supplying them with smelt. I think that Salmon Scotland, which is really the industry body, I don't think anybody is in any doubt that based on what you're saying of 85% of removal of solids and based on your business plan, then it probably has got merit. But if you can only produce, well, at the moment, 40%, I don't think they would be saying the same thing.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, the main reason was just to make sure I understood what your evidence was.
May I add?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. May I just add one point, which is really picking up the same thing, but I've just looked up Salmon Scotland. They are the voice of farm-raised Scottish salmon. Can I make exactly the same point, really? But it's not surprising. Your feed suppliers, your oxygen supplier, and the voice of farmed salmon is on one side, whereas the people that Mr. Nicholl referenced, Marine Scotland, Nature Scotland, Fisheries Management Scotland, Control Aqua, they are the independent and objective voices in all of this.
Okay. The last 2 items in the agenda kind of rolled together to a certain extent, I think. So number 12 was the post. Is everyone okay? Just to push through to finish this. The post. Number 12 was the post-smolt model, and the appellant says that it's important for the post-smolt model, this model, that the site is in its own disease management area, and as I understand it, because if it was in a zone with another fish farm and there was a problem of disease, then the post-smolts couldn't be exported to other sites, and that's the rationale for saying that the model really requires its own disease management zone. So I just wondered whether any other parties had any comment on that particular statement from the appellant. Mr. Nicholl.
Could I just ask one question, and it's probably ignorance, but does that mean that if you put that into place, you effectively sterilise Loch Long for any other fish farms?
I don't know what the answer to this is. I don't know if there is an answer.
the way the disease management area regulations are written is that there is a presumption against sites that join up existing disease management areas. So if our farm creates a disease management area around us, and there's another disease management area further south, and another farm tries to deploy in between, joining those two together, there would be a presumption against that for Marine Scotland science.
Sorry, can I ask a couple of questions? I'm not entirely sure that I understood that answer, Mr. Schotter, but perhaps are there examples already where this is in place and post-smolt salmon are moved from one DMA to another? And what are the controls that have to be in place for that to work? And I guess also just I must admit, when we read the original planning document, I hadn't seen this as any consideration at all, and that it was only a harvest model. Is this a new idea or something that just was an oversight in the original document, or implied?
Did you hear the second question? Okay, or the end of that? You broke up a little bit, Mr. Stopford. I'm just checking you understand the question.
I think I did. If I don't answer it properly, please ask me to clarify. But in terms of moving fish, it's very much industry practice now to take fish from existing farms, open net farms, and to move them to other sites. And there is a process that allows that to happen through Marine Scotland, which requires the fish to be healthy and you to communicate with, if you're moving it in a different DMA, to communicate with the other farmers in that zone and to let them know what you're doing and get their consent's probably the wrong word, but inform them and allow them to raise concerns with the regulator if they want to. So it's a fairly normal practice just now. Was there a second part that I've missed? Yep. Yeah, and I think you correctly, sir, outlined the issue is it's not that if we get a disease, a notifiable disease, it's if someone else in another farm in the DMA gets the problem, that would prevent us from moving healthy fish to a different DMA, which would be something that would be challenging from us from an economics point of view, potentially.
Sorry, may I think Mr. Stopford's last question was about when this post-smolt model was introduced. That was part of the original planning application and described in the environmental impact assessment, and it was also considered in the car licence application too.
Okay, sorry, yep.
Thank you, sir. Do you know where the post-smolts will be moved to and how?
I don't know. I don't have a specific plan. We wouldn't be doing this for 3 years from now. So to have an exact every I dotted T crossed, I think would be unreasonable. The how would be through wellboats.
May I just confirm as well, these sites that would receive the fish are not sites that would be operated by us. These are existing sites already operating under their own licences.
Sir, could I come in for a second? Thank you, sir. Just listening to the debate about the post-smolt model, and there may be some benefit of them being in their own disease management area, but the national park does not see that as being benefits such as could ever support this proposal, sir. And Mr. Nicholl makes an important point about the inhibiting effect of that, and there could be no more farms. In terms of the actual post-smolt model, I think you will have it recorded in your notes or in the evidence which the park has given in written form, that the national park finds it somewhat undermining to claim environmental benefits for the semi-enclosed method, yet then adopt a post-smolt method, which means you'll be taking them from a semi-enclosed cage and putting them into open nets. And I think a big part of the appellant's case is that if they go into open nets, they can escape, and they won't receive the sort of the benefits of reduction in sea lice. So we just find that a bit curious and undermining in terms of the benefits.
I was going to. That's essentially the second part. My second question under this part of the agenda. As I am leaving aside the issue of they're going into open cages where there might be a greater risk of escape, as I understand the appellant's evidence is that there are clear advantages in terms of sea lice infestation from taking the fish to post-smolt, so that thereafter, when they're in an open net cage, they are still far less likely to suffer from problems from sea lice than if they had been grown from a much younger age in that cage. So that's what I was going to ask, do other people accept that that's a benefit? It sounds like the National Park Authority doesn't accept that, but I don't know if other people have got a comment on that notion before I go back to the appellant. Okay, over to you.
I think you've summed up our position and indeed our evidence, and whilst Mr McKee may raise a concern about it, there's been no evidence from the park to suggest that the evidence of the experts who sit to my left is undermined in that regard.
I think it underlines the fact that sea lice control, and you said there won't be a problem with sea lice, and that I presume from what Mr Nicholl asked you question whether you're going to hold a licence in case of sea lice infestation, and you said I think you weren't, but you were aware of it and you would apply for a licence. But with the post-smolt model, you're going to have 900,000 fish in one cage, I understand. Is that right? Multiplied by 4. And each of those post-smolts is, if you have a sea lice problem, each of those post-smolts may have, the amount of fish is going to be multiplied to a huge amount. So it's really, really important that sea lice are never allowed to get to a level where they affect the fish in your farms, or they could affect wild fish. And I just like to make that comment because the National Park needs to take that into consideration. It's really important, the sea lice control. And if what you say isn't right, we've got a real problem because it's a huge biomass.
Okay, thank you. I think we've already covered that ground, but by all means respond if you want to. I was going to go on to the last question under 12, and it's not so much, the planning authority, the National Park Authority had asked the appellant to explain what proportions of the development will be post-smolt and entry to harvest. From reading, and can this be quantified at this time, was my question. I wondered whether that was a commercial consideration which you just wouldn't be able to quantify at this point, but you can let me know what the answer is.
The short answer is that we can't define it at this time. I mean, there are a number of operational advantages of starting with post-smolt, and commercial advantages from starting with post-smolt. And I can go through those if that's helpful.
To be honest, I mean, the question for me is just a factual one. Is it quantifiable or not? I mean, the National Park Authority will have a reason for asking, but I was just trying to. Is that known just now, or is it not?
No, it's not known. It is an option to use post-smolt rather than entry to harvest, but we haven't made a final decision on that at this stage, and we wouldn't be starting farming for another almost 3 years. So it's difficult to, it's difficult to know exactly what commercial model you'll deploy at the time. I mean, if I may, it's very important for fish farmers to have some flexibility to be able to run their business. And so giving us flexibility, allowing us flexibility so that we can do the right thing for the business, but also for the environment is very important. And sorry, one other thing. One of the things about post-smolt is that they would be younger fish that are sexually immature, and so the risks around genetic integration would be much lower with the post-smolt model than with the entry to harvest model. Although I would say even in the entry to harvest model, larger fish, when you harvest them, most of them are also immature. There'd be more time before the fish got to sexual maturity if there was an escape event using post-smolt.
Sir, if I could just come in there. Obviously, this is straying into territory which will be covered in PLI. Obviously, the Park Authority has witnesses that will cover this ground.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's probably straying into Thursday's agenda. Okay. If I may, then I'm just going to move on to the final question I had. Yeah, so is this idea of the potential for rollout elsewhere? So in the appellants, it's a question for the appellant really in the first instance. And I'm just thinking of the hearing statement said earlier on, I think at 5.8, that this was the only location identified which met your criteria. But then later on, I think it says, well, it's not the only one, but it was the best suited site. So I suppose my question is that if across Scotland, part of your argument for the benefits of this are it'll be a step change. There are implications across Scotland, but if there are few sites available for this kind of model, is that not a constraint on that wider rollout? I'm particularly thinking of the issue we just discussed about the need or the benefits of a self-contained disease management zone. Do those factors constrain the extent to which this can be replicated at other sites?
So, I mean, semi-closed containment systems can be rolled out in different locations. I would say, you know, I can't quite get the timeline right in my head, but maybe 10 or 15 years ago, people who had concerns about the freshwater environment were saying you should really be using on land more closed containment systems, and the industry's sort of response often was it's difficult, it's too expensive, but once one was in place, people could point to it, and now it's much more common. And so that's really my vision for Scotland is that there's an issue around fish welfare, environmental impacts, and what we want to do is demonstrate and show what can be done commercially, and then there'll be an opportunity for others to model and to copy. I mean, I had a look at the sites in Scotland, and maybe, you know, mainland sites that I've driven by, most of them in the last few years, and just looking at the sort of exposure, maybe as many as 46 of the 95 sites in mainland Scotland could be converted to this type of technology. Now, not all could be used for post-smolt though. So that's what makes this particular location in Beinn quite unique. It would be possible to do post-smolt at several sites in one region at the same time in a coordinated way. And often industry players do control, if you like, disease management areas of their own, and so they would have the ability to deploy this sort of approach differently. So they won't work everywhere. I mean, many sites are simply too exposed to be able to accommodate this type of technology. But in my view, I can see a future where it's the elimination of sea lice from salmon farms by adopting post-smolt at some locations, converting sites to entry to harvest in other locations, and using the post-smolt locations to feed the more exposed sites that can't accommodate semi-closed systems. And that's the kind of, you know, that's the kind of big picture that we would love to be seeing developing in Scotland over time, keeping the jobs in rural Scotland, controlling environmental impacts, improving fish health.
Can I just ask one given the lateness of the afternoon. Mr Hawthorne, one question which I think perhaps underlies your concern, or one of the thoughts behind the question. Is there any particular, when you're trying to demonstrate a model, how important is it that you can demonstrate success? And would it be possible to demonstrate success if you were developing where there were other existing fish farms?
Yeah, I mean, the first deployment is really important, in my opinion, for this type of technology. And being successful is something it's going to be. If it doesn't, if people are not convinced by it because of, let's say, a problem at another fish farm that then causes problems on our semi-closed fish farm, then that'll be a negative for this approach, and that's one of the reasons that we think that this is an ideal location, in particular for the first deployment of this technology in Scotland. That's why I think that the Scottish Salmon Scotland are saying this is nationally important, and I think it's why the Scottish Government said this project is of strategic importance.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr Nicholl and then Ms Tant.
Well, what I would like to say is what Mr Finlay said earlier when he referred to Mr Hawthorne as being an expert, and I'm not in any way decrying his expertise, but I think it's very telling that the evidence given by Loch Long Salmon, there is no witness here, this is an expert in semi-contained fish farms. And I think we're talking semantics at the moment because there is an aspiration there to create an enclosed fish environment that takes away the waste to 85%. And takes it to the shore and does all sorts of green things with it. But that's not happened. We're at 40%. So what we're talking about, a rollout, yeah, it would be fantastic if this was able to happen. But there is nobody who has been able to do that at scale where this has happened. So the potential for it for the future would be fantastic, but nobody's given us that model. Yeah, and I mean, if I could just say, if the appellant could take us to one of these facilities where this exact same system is working, then that would be such a helpful move.
Ms Tant.
Thank you, sir. Now, I understood that, Mr Hawthorne, that you said that the location for this first deployment is really, really important so that you can demonstrate for future rollout. Is that correct? May I ask like that, or?
You want to clarify if it was clear?
Well, I mean, it's on the public record that we would like to see ourselves and others develop this technology. I mean, it's one location on its own won't change the Scottish industry, but one location starting and being successful provides a pathway, like what happened with freshwater farming systems.
So I've understood if one location, the first location, should be successful, and that would provide the platform for further locations. As I understand it, you're in a pre-application process for Loch Linnhe. How does that marry with proving the concept here in Scotland, first of all?
If I may, sir, when we're talking about demonstrating the site in Beinn, the site could be demonstrated in other locations, but it would be best demonstrated at Beinn because of these unique characteristics. So when we're not saying this site needs to roll out for our other sites to operate, we're saying that in order for us to achieve change on the pace that we would like to see across Scotland, Beinn is the ideal site.
Okay, I don't know if there's any other points, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, I just, I suppose, to be clear, and I suppose a recap, from the Park Authority point of view, we do not consider this as a suitable site. It's clear, and as what has been said from the appellant, that they are pursuing an alternative site. So, that underlines the point. There are other options here. This site at Beinn isn't suitable, and the proposal has not taken account of constraints and the sensitivities of the site. So I think it's just clear just to emphasise that point.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if there's anything else, Mr. Hawthorne.
Sorry, but Mr. Mims sort of said this site is not suitable. But for all the reasons we've been discussing today, I'd just like to make clear that obviously we have a slightly different view. Well summed up. Well, sorry.
Just on that point, if, for example, you didn't get planning here, where would you identify as another site which would be suitable for rolling out this technology as an experiment in Scotland?
We're not planning to roll out an experiment.
Can I just ask if you would potentially be able to roll this out or try this as an experiment anywhere else where there's another fish farm in the vicinity?
I don't quite understand the question. We're not planning to do an experiment. We're planning to roll out a commercial operation, and obviously we've applied to put another site in Loch Linnhe, where I know that you live locally there, and so obviously we believe that site is a suitable site for this technology. But in terms of our sort of strategic vision of Loch Long Salmon is to bring semi-closed containment systems to Scotland, and through leadership and demonstrating what's possible, make a change against the way fish are farmed in Scotland in a positive way for the environment and for the fish.
Okay, everyone's shown remarkable stamina. Sorry, Mr. Stopford, could you? Can't hear you, I'm afraid, Mr. Stopford, you're on mute.
Shall I phone him?
Whilst you're doing that, I can maybe pick up a procedural point. So you mentioned, he's back. No. Mr. Findlay, you mentioned the notion of closing submissions, which isn't something I've raised yet. I didn't raise it this morning because it was only the two main parties. So some people were participating in the hearing, some people in an inquiry, some both, but I think it strikes me that it would be probably worthwhile to give everyone the chance to make closing submissions at the end of the process, and usually that's the objecting party. Mr. Stopford, are you there now?
Yeah, I am. Apologies, I hate technology too. My earbud just ran out of battery. I guess the last question I had was on the rollout. We've heard today there are lots of technologies. There are lots of companies using this in Norway, in the Faroes, in Canada, including international players who have sites in Scotland. I'm just wondering, what are the thoughts on why no one else has chosen to put one of these systems in one of the areas that they already have? or a new fish farm. I mean, for any of the existing players.
So, I mean, I can't read the mind of incumbents. I think that Robin's correctly identified that people that operate in Scotland are using these systems in other jurisdictions. I'll be super proud to be the first to bring it to Scotland and demonstrate the benefits of it here.
Mr. Nicholl.
I hate to go on about this, but could Mr. Hawthorne tell us where one is that is operating the same as this Reithe one? That's simple as that.
We've maybe covered that ground, but I think already, haven't we? Let me.
So, forgive me, we've asked, but we haven't been told the answer. We've asked repeatedly.
Ms. Malcolm needs to restrain herself. We have made it very clear that no farm is operating at 85%. So if that is what Mr. Nicholl is asking, which is clearly it is, the answer is nowhere. We've made that absolutely clear. If the question is, are other farms operating in with semi-contained systems in Norway or elsewhere, with respect, Mr. Nicholl's group have a list of companies that operate farms in Norway. They could easily ascertain their location. That it is it's an issue that we have explored, and in my submission, the evidence is as you've heard on that, sir.
Okay, Mr. Nicholl, I'm going to draw it to a close because I fear we could be here for too long. But what I was in the process of saying is at the end of the inquiry, stroke hearing, I was proposing to allow all those who have participated the chance to make a closing submission, and if you like, reflecting and updating their position in the light of the proceedings that have gone ahead. What I'm also going to ask people to do is to provide a summary of their overall case, so that when I come to write my report, I can do it quickly. If I can, in effect, cut and paste your summary of case into my report, rather than spend a long time trying to summarise your case on your behalf. So that, and I'll give you a word limit in doing that. I need to think about what the appropriate one is. So it was just to say that's how I'm thinking of running it. Typically, the appellant has the last hit at that we get the National Park Authority's views, the opposing parties' views, their statements in first, and then the National Park would be able to respond, although perhaps all the summaries could come at the same time, because the summary isn't supposed to be responding to the other parties' cases. But it was just to say I can set that out at the end of the process and write out. Is there any comments about that process, Mr. Houghton?
About that, so it was just whether you and when you may know whether the conditions and obligations is going to be a hearing, or whether you're just going to leave it as written reps.
Well, that's a good question. For me, I don't think I need a hearing, because I think I understand what people's views are, and I think I understand my own views on each of those issues. However, we're all here if the principal parties and indeed Mr. Nicholl all feel there would be value in doing that, and we've got some time there. I'm not resistant to doing it. I'm just so I haven't. I don't know if there are other views from Mr. Finlay or from Mr. McKee about that.
Well, so if you don't have any questions, you've got fairly full. There are disputes between us and the Park Authority, but I think you've got fairly full views on both sides. In our view, there's no need for a further session at this stage.
So I think the Park Authority would just like to keep that under review, because there may be points emerging from tested evidence that require to be maybe translated into. So how would that be enforced in an enforceable, reasonable condition? So just on closing submissions, the Park Authority have no difficulty with that. And procedurally, can I just be sure that the closing submissions would be covering all of the issues? So we are talking about obviously policy, seascape, and effects, the nature of development and effects on wild salmon, just so it can be clear.
Yes, I wasn't proposing it to limit. It'd be too awkward, I think, to limit it. It's the entirety of your case.
I agree with you. I just want to be sure. You know what I'm like with these procedure notices, sir. You know, I like them to be clear cut, crystal clear.
Okay, so we'll write out about that at the end of the process then, and we can keep the point about conditions under review, because I had noticed that in your evidence you caveated that your view on conditions with, well, that might evolve depending on the discussions that take place. Okay, so I would just say thank you then for everyone. Thank you for Mr. Stopford for persevering with your IT issues, but thanks for everyone.
Well, for your patience too.
It's been a long day for some of us, and my plan is to start again for those who are participating tomorrow at 9:30. But unless there's anything else, I would just say thank you very much to everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.